For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Hey everybody, today we are debating whether or not Noah's Ark could have worked, and we're starting right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for this epic debate in which we have Nephilim Free and Creationist Cat. We're taking a stroll down memory lane of YouTube, and this is going to be a big one. So, want to mention, both of the speakers have their links in the description. So if you love their content, if you love what you're hearing, you can go down there, check out their links, and subscribe to their channels as conveniently as can be. And want to say, if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button as we strive to host, you could say, fair, hopefully fair. We do our best, fair debates in which people from all walks of life, Christians, atheists, Democrats, Republicans, Jedi, and even Sith, can come and debate and be welcome. So thrilled to have you here. And with that, just want to mention a couple of quick little channel updates. First, let me know in the live chat if anything is going wrong with the audio. But from what I'm looking at, we have finally got some legit audio. I am so excited. I'm so sorry. We've had some problems with the audio lately the last few weeks. They just kind of like popped up, and I was like, what is going on here? But we are thrilled for it's going to be beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. We are stoked to get started. So with that, just want to let you know, Nephilim Free taking the affirmative on Noah's Ark being able to get the job done during the flood, you could say. He will be starting. And
but before we start, can I just, I apologize.
No
hey,
problem.
Everybody. Thanks for having me. First of all, it's just a pleasure and a sheer sensation to be here. But I just wanted to say real quickly, I need to clarify this. Creationist Cat, it couldn't be here today. Those who are familiar with my channel, I'm actually Vadim, otherwise known as Hey It's Vadim, otherwise known as his humble human slave. He usually uses harsher words than that, but anyhow, that's who I am. Creationist Cat is, there's a widely spread rumor that we are one and the same. It's just an insidious rumor that won't go away. So anyhow, I needed to say that at the top just to clarify. I don't want people to be confused. So there you go. That's true. No, that's right. You told me that before. I forgot. I've got to update the border. I promise I will do that. So, messenger of Creationist Cat. It's cool. You can say that it's Creationist Cat, and that, and I already made the clarification. So
you got
unfortunately, more people know me or know of CC than know me. But that's my lot in life.
Absolutely. You got it. Well, we are pumped to have both of you here. It really is an honor. And these guys go way back into the old school days of YouTube, like I said. So like back in the days of like Potholer and Venom Fang X, these guys were like doing videos on them. But Neph and Creation, so did you guys ever cross? Did you two ever cross swords?
No, we've never.
I don't think so.
No, we haven't. I mean, I've watched many a debate with this gentleman. As I was telling him earlier, I was a big fan of his old school headphones. Each ear cup was approximately the size of a mature honeydew melon. I
had them custom made by Honeywell just for me.
Okay. Well, then that's appropriate.
Yeah.
I'm just thrilled to be here, and it's 2013 all over again.
It is. So with that, we will let Nephilim kick it off. And in case, I think I had read the format, but actually beforehand I had, but let me read it to the audience. So 10-minute openings, 8-minute rebuttals, 25 minutes of open convo, and then 5-minute closings followed by roughly 25 minutes of Q&A. If you have a question, feel free to fire it into the live chat. I will pull it out, put it in the list, and then we will ask it. And we do a super chat, so if you want to do a super chat, they go to the top of the list, as well as you can make a comment toward one of the speakers if you want, that they, of course, would get a chance to respond to. So with that, very happy to have you here. And Neph, I've got the timer set for 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay, excellent. So let me establish the historicity of Noah's Ark. Firstly, everyone knows that it's recorded in legends around the world. Virtually every culture on the earth has had legends of it. The famous ancient historian Berosus stated in the 3rd century BC, to this day, a small part of the ship that came to rest in Armenia remains in the Gordanian Mountains in Armenia. And some people go there to scrape away pieces to keep those good luck charms. Chrysostom stated, "Have you heard of the flood, of that universal destruction? It wasn't just a threat, was it? Was it not carried out? Or isn't the ark there for our admonition to this very day?" So apparently the ark, some portion of it, remained in the world visible for many centuries. Epiphanes of Salamis said, "Do you seriously suppose that we are not able to prove our point? Even to this day, remains of Noah's Ark is in the country of the Kurds." Isidore of Seville said, "Ararat is a mountain in Armenia where historians testify that the ark came to rest after the flood. So to this day, wood remains of it are to be seen there." Titus Flavius Josephus said the same kind of thing. I'll pass over that. Mantheo, the ancient Egyptian priest and historian, 300 BC, said the same thing. But he got the persons wrong. He thought Noah was Thoth. So ancient historians, now Nicholas of Damascus, 1st century BC, said there was a great mountain in Armenia over Minas called Baris, upon which it is reported many, etc., speaks of the flood. Okay, so and then Theophilus of Antioch, the same thing, testified to the historicity of the ark. The ark was known to exist in ancient times, right on up to the early Middle Ages. And Noah and his family probably used pieces of it to build shelter after the ark, but many parts of it, pieces of it, still remained for many centuries, according to the ancient historians of the world. So Noah's Ark was a very big ship. It actually wasn't a ship. It was likely a barge. Answers in Genesis probably got its shape wrong. I personally believe they may be right. I don't know. But that's an actual replica of its size. It wasn't a boat. It was a ship. This is a warehouse in Mississippi. It has 300,000 square feet. It's 1 story tall. If you put a second story on top of that, it would still be 64,000 square feet smaller in area than the interior of Noah's Ark. That's a lot of space. Now, atheists claim, well, you couldn't fit all the kinds of living things in there. Well, there's a straw man argument built into that. They say they're pointing to species. Noah didn't have to bring species. He only had to bring created kinds. You can get 200 breeds of dog from 2 dogs. How many original created kinds had to go on the ark? Nobody knows. Baraminology is not a perfect science yet. And so there were likely, creationist scientists estimate, probably 8,000 original created kinds of living things, and from those 8,000 you can get 1 billion varieties. We call them species. The interior space of the ark, if you allot for the tremendous size of the beams that would have been used to build it, not boards like in 1750 or 1850 wooden ship, giant beams of wood. If you allot for them, the ark could have had 646,800 square feet of interior space. That's 1 floor, if I'm not mistaken. 323,400 cubic square feet for a floor. That's 107,800 square feet per floor. If each cage in the ark were 2 cubits, that's 6 feet by 2 feet by 2 cubits by 2 cubits by 2 cubits, then there could have been 13,475 cages in it. 2 floors would have been 26,950 cages for animals. That's only 2 floors. And that doesn't include having cages upon cages. The average size of an animal is the size of a sheep. Noah would have brought small animals, infants. Why bring fully sized? He wouldn't bring a full-size T-Rex. He would bring one 1 foot tall because it requires very little food. That requires a cage that's just a couple of feet square. He could have put tens of thousands, 26,950 cages in it, at least. And there are not 26,000 original created kinds. So now atheists claim, well, you can't make a ship out of wood that big and still float. Well, that's not true. In 1411, the emperor's admiral, Chinese emperor's admiral, Zheng He, built a ship almost approximately the size of Noah's Ark and traveled around the world with an armada of 20,000 men. These are actual reproductions of the sizes. This is a rendition of the size. We see the Titanic, the USS Wyoming, the Santa Maria, Noah's Ark, and young Ha's flagship was longer than Noah's Ark, and it floated. It went all the way to Africa and back. So the idea that the ark couldn't have been sustainable, wouldn't have been able to float and be seaworthy because it was so large and made of wood, is scientifically invalid, because young Ha did it in 1411 AD with a ship bigger than Noah's Ark. Now, the ark didn't have to didn't have to be a ship. It was likely a box. That's what we think of when we think of ark. We think of a box of wood. It didn't have to go anywhere. It just had to float for a year. So now I want you to see about the structural integrity of the Ark of Noah. These are beams of wood that are made of numerous boards which have been glued together from Douglas fir. It's 4 feet wide by 6 inches wide and 50 feet long. Now, here's I want to show you what happens when you test this. Well, if I can get to it. Okay, let's see here. So these researchers tested these boards. Remember now, this is only about 6 feet wide, 72 feet long, and 4 feet tall. And they tested it with weight to see how much weight it would support. And you're about to watch it fail. They're applying tens and thousands of pounds of pressure to it, hydraulic pressure. And we're going to watch it fail right before your eyes. Here it goes. Here it goes. Here it goes. There it goes. That's where it failed. 72,000 pounds of pressure is what it took before it failed. 72,000 pounds. It was approximately 6 inches wide and 4 feet tall. And it supported 72,000 pounds. An 18-wheeler truck fully loaded with merchandise weighs between 70 and 80,000 pounds. What you just saw right here would support an entire 18-wheeler loaded with merchandise headed for Dollar General store. Now, Noah was a smart fella, and God instructed him on how to build the ark. It's almost certain that Noah would have used gigantic cores from gigantic trees to build the timbers for the ark. Since a timber 6 inches wide by 4 feet by 50 or 72 feet long can support 72,000 pounds, which is as much as a fully loaded 18-wheeler, how much weight would using the core of a California redwood or sequoia tree, how much would that support? There are numerous species of gigantic trees in the world. These are just two. You could cut all the extraneous parts, bark and the outer part away from this tree, and easily have a core, which is the strongest part of a tree, 10 feet by 10 feet square. Let's do a little math and see how much potential strength is in that. Okay, so we have 100 square feet of wood in a 6 inch by 4 feet by 50 foot long wood plank. I got that wrong. The number was actually 72 feet. So it's, let's say 125 or 35 feet. Right, it supported 72 tons before it gave. Okay, Noah's Ark would have been made from timbers probably 10 feet by 10 feet by 50 feet. That's 5,000 square feet a foot, which by using the same math would hold 3,600,000 pounds of weight, or 1,800 tons. That's one timber. Now this is the Disney cruise ship Wonder. It weighs 83,000 tons. According to the math I just provided you, just 46 timbers of Noah's Ark will support that whole ship. Noah probably used hundreds of timbers like that to build the ark. Hundreds. Now, a creationist organization in Korea approached a world-class shipbuilding firm in Korea and asked them to test the seaworthiness of Noah's Ark using the measurements given in the Bible. And they said it hardly can be improved on for seaworthiness. So I don't think there's any valid, I just see no valid arguments that the Ark of Noah is an implausible idea, especially if you consider Noah would have been smart enough to use the cores of gigantic trees, which would have been plenty on the earth in the environment prior to the flood. A 10 foot by 10 foot by 50 foot core can hold 1,800 tons, according to the math I provided. Even if my math was wrong and it would only support 1,200 tons, That's a lot of strength. So the claim that it wouldn't be seaworthy is refuted by the fact that Young Ha built a ship just bigger than the Ark, traveled the seas all the way to Africa from China. The idea that it couldn't have been strong enough is refuted by the fact that Noah would have used massive beams of the cores of gigantic trees, and you've seen the kind of strength they have. Okay, and so the historicity of it, I've shown it was recorded by ancient historians. So I don't see that there's any logical, rational argument against the Ark of Noah. I'm trying to close the application window. Oh, it's not going to be this again. I got to leave the thing and come back again. Oh. Well, the window minimized itself into some tiny little thing automatically, and I don't understand why. I can't get it to maximize now. Okay, there we go. I found it. There was a little.
Nice.
There we go.
I was rooting for you.
No problemo. We are there and ready to go. So thank you very much for that opening statement from Nephilim Free. And with that, I have the timer set for 10 minutes. And Creationist Cat, I will set it on I will start it on your first word. Thanks for being here.
My name is Vadim, sir. But thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Have we started?
Yes.
Okay, so friends, enemies, everyone in between, I'd just like to start out by explaining to viewers why it is that I took interest in taking part in this debate. You know, some viewers who haven't been watching the CC channel for more than a couple of years might think this is a little bit of a curveball. You know, as we always, you know, usually, but, you know, not all the time, but primarily focus on comic takes on political issues or social issues with political underpinnings. But the channel was initially started as a means to tackle religious fundamentalism. And the point behind that has always been because I believe that evangelicals have a stranglehold on the Republican Party, or actually it could be said the other way around. And more importantly, its voter base, causing millions of Americans to vote against their best interests. Now, I want to say that I find the Noah's Ark myth to be perhaps the most pernicious within the entire Bible, because it's a point of entry for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children. You know, I mean, it's this story that has all these monkeys, lions, tigers, giraffes, platypuses. Is that platypi? I don't know what the plural of that is. Somebody let me know in the comments, you know, and kangaroos. And oh my God, isn't that adorable? Of course, you know, they completely neglect the philosophical ramifications of a supposedly all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving God deciding to genocide every man, woman, and millions of babies. What did these babies do to deserve that? You know, that never really registers because their skulls haven't fully hardened yet and stuff. Can't blame them. Now, before I give my main simple argument, Creationist Cat insisted that I play his explanation for how the Noah's Ark journey was feasible. And we're going to watch that. And then I am going to provide some commentary. So just let me set that up real quick. Share. And yep. Do you see it now? Awesome. All right, here we go, guys. Enjoy the ride. Oh, okay, wait.
Once aboard the Ark, Noah and his tried their best to keep everybody fed with what they had readily available. Fish for the carnivores and seaweed for the vegetarians. But it wasn't long until about 95% of the animals started complaining that their stomachs weren't capable of properly digesting seaweed nutrients and fish proteins. So all these picky eaters start throwing up the fish guts they can't properly synthesize all over the place. And pretty soon the predators are like, screw this, I'm going to eat. So they just start murdering indiscriminately, knocking species after species permanently out of the food chain. Now it's chaos. And since there was only 2 of each of them, their survival instincts start kicking in. And pretty soon, all the animals were fucking each other like there was no tomorrow. It was just this huge, nightmarish barnyard blood orgy, with baboons fornicating on top of baby hippos, copulating zebra butts spinning around, and this frickin' anteater's doinger bouncing all over the place. And then this monkey just starts fucking this duck like it's some kind of free-for-all. And this big-ass turtle is like, whoa, I'm Superman! And everybody's still throwing up while they climax and gorge on the world's last two baby woolly mammoths. Finally, Noah pops in and he's like, what the fuck, you guys? This is disgusting! Look, I am 600 years old. I started building this thing when I was somewhere between 475 to 525. I am way too old for this shit. Well, the animals could have wasted their time feeling pretty ashamed of themselves at that moment, but they realized then and there that if they were going to make it, they'd have to step it up and act like a team. Mr. Beaver, Mr. Rhino, and Mr. and Mrs. Woodpecker sprang into action, carving small holes into the ship's walls for everyone to crap out of. It may not seem like much, but it was a start. The animals also enacted a strict anti-fornication rule under penalty of death. Now, you may think it's impossible to get herds of wild beasts to deny their innate sexual instincts, but you see the unicorn species go extinct in a public execution, and suddenly your biological urges seem pretty easy to control. And yeah, maybe you'd cry over it, but that night, you had unicorn meat for dinner. It was through brave sacrifices like these, and the animal kingdom's willingness to work together as a whole, that the brave mammals, reptiles, and whatever the other things are called survived. They truly are the unsung heroes of Noah's Ark.
Okay, so that was CC's little TED Talk there. That's an abbreviated version. You can see the full one on the Creationist Cat channel if you're interested. So now here's the argument, folks. All right, science does not work backwards. If you're going to use it as a justification or proof, it's got to be replicable. All of the justifications for the feasibility of Noah's Ark rely on unjustified assumptions, or, could have been possibles and straight up God did it reasoning. I truly hope that CC doesn't think I'm slandering him by saying this, but the rationale CC was using there was very similar to this. He's taking a premise he firmly believes to be true, and he's working backwards to create arguments for how it could have happened. He's also using pseudoscience and just specious claims. We heard some from Nephilim Free himself. He talked about the Yang Ha ship. Well, that is widely regarded as pseudo history based on speculations, assertions, and sloppy research. So these sorts of arguments are used rather than using any solid existing evidence within the overwhelming body of scientific data that we have on record to prove that it happened in the first place. Now, although the arguments we've already heard from Mr. Nephilim may not seem on the surface to be as over-the-top wacky as CC's, maybe they'll get a little weirder. I'm guessing he's not going to employ as much brazen vulgarity as CC, although I'm really hoping he does, because come on, that'd be awesome. His arguments will operate in the same basic manner, working backwards from a premise he firmly believes to create a list of mostly highly dubious claims of how it could have been possible. He'll throw in some pseudoscience, pseudo-history, like I already mentioned. He'll offer a ton of explanations that have no mention in scripture. That's pretty important, I think. You'd think that they'd mention these things in the Bible. I'm guessing he'll also invoke, and he already has invoked, a decent amount of arguments that are fundamentally God did it arguments along the way. And, either science is how we prove things or it isn't, okay? If your proposed methods do not pass muster in modern scientific conversations. They cannot be assumed to be true. And if you assume them to be true and then work backwards, you're not doing science. Either way, the null hypothesis rings true here. Noah's Ark could not have done the job, and I'm sorry, but you can't prove otherwise. I'll go into why more later, but I just want to remind the audience that the topic of this debate is, could Noah's Ark have done the job? I will provide, as we go on, many common sense reasons as to why it simply couldn't. But remember, if he invokes arguments that fly in the face of what we know about physics, basic animal behavior and instincts and more, he's basically invoking a God did it argument, and he's failed. He needs to put up an argument for how, without divine intervention, Noah's Ark could have done the job. If he invokes divine intervention, then Noah's Ark didn't do the job. God did the job. And if God did it, why use science at all to explain how it happened? So I forfeit the rest of my time. We can move on.
You bet. All right. So thank you both, gentlemen, for your opening statements. We will now move into the rebuttal phase. So thanks for your questions so far. Remember, if you have a question, you can shoot it into the live chat. It can be for either debater or both debaters. I will fish it out and then compile them to read at the end. Neff, I've got the clock set for you for 8 minutes for your rebuttal, and the floor is yours.
Well, what we heard was mockery without any argument so far. I'm hoping that he'll do something more substantial than that. Says animals would eat each other. How are they going to do that if they're in cages? Noah would be too old to build the ark. Well, I get that, but then the Bible does tell us that men lived to be nearly 1,000 years old before the flood, and we have science that would support that idea. In the fossil record demonstrates that creatures grew to enormous size in the past. They can't do that today because of the changed environment. So man's lifespan dropped dramatically after the flood. That's called genetic entropy, if nothing else. He used a picture of a toy ark to mock the actual rational model of the ark. I don't see that as intellectual. That's not scientific either. He said that it relies on assumptions, but I didn't employ any assumptions. I gave a scientific argument and even employed mathematics. He said it won't pass my beliefs about it won't pass science, but he offered no science. Disregarded Sheng Yao's ship. Says, just disregarded it, but it's a historical fact. He says it's pseudoscience, but I provided a timber test in mathematics to support my views. Says that it's not, and he says, implied that I might be invoking divine intervention, but I didn't imply that God participated in any way in the whole system, in the process of Noah building the ark or writing out the flood. I didn't once even refer to God. So I didn't employ divine intervention at all. God may have intervened. He was on the ark according to scripture. God told Noah, come into the ark. He didn't say go into it, come into it. God was on the ark with Noah. So God may have intervened. And I wouldn't have a problem with that. But I did show also the historicity of the ark as recorded by ancient historians. So, and of course, the fact that legends of it exist in every culture of the world is powerful evidence that gives us an inference that there's truth to the story. Maybe not exactly the way the Bible says. I mean, you could make that argument, say, well, I don't believe it was the way the Bible says. But I mean, we can't dismiss the historical evidence found in the ancient historians and in the various tribes of mankind, because they all have legends of the flood, and that points to something actual happening in the past. All the tribes of mankind would not invent the idea that there was a flood and that there was an ark and that man saved himself, his family, and all the various kinds of living things, and all the similarities that are found in these legends. That simply is not something that each individual tribe of mankind would invent, and it happened to be that they all would invent the same kind of thing. That's just completely implausible. The explanation for that, of course, is that man did have a singular culture in Babel, just as the Bible says. And when man diverged from there and split away from it in family groups, he took remembrance of these events with him. This is powerful evidence that the Tower of Babel affair is an actual historical event, because it's utterly implausible to believe that the Aborigines, the Slavs, the Chinese, Japanese, the Native Americans, the Germanic peoples, the African peoples, etc., around the world would all happen to invent the same idea, that there was a massive flood that wiped out the world and man saved himself and the animals on an ark. That's just completely implausible. There's no rationale behind believing that all these separate tribes of mankind, which according to evolutionists, atheists, have been separate from each other for tens of thousands of years, at the very least, since the last ice age, more than 10,000 years, would have happened to have remembered that, especially if they came from, some Cro-Magnon creature or Neanderthal like thing. That's just implausible to believe they would have all invented this same scenario. It just can't have happened. That's not logical. What's logical is there was a flood, there was a Noah, and in the Hawaiian legend, his name is actually Nuah. Gee, that sounds an awful lot like Noah. So there's tremendous powerful evidence that the flood of Noah actually did take place, and that the ark is a real historical event. And the argument from this debate is really about, would Noah's ark work? And I think I've already made the case that Noah's Ark would work, that a ship that size could be built out of wood and would be seaworthy, as testified to by a world-class shipbuilding firm in South Korea. And I've shown the math that the wood would be strong enough to create such a boat, and it could ride out the flood using nothing more than the cores of very large trees. So I haven't heard any argument that Noah's Ark wouldn't work, that it's not scientifically plausible that man could build a ship this size out of wood and put, many tons of animals and supplies inside and ride out the flood. No argument has been given that it could not work. On the other hand, I have provided very good reason to believe that it would work, and I employed mathematics and scientific wood tests to back up my statement. So I'll call it quits with that for now. Just to recap and say that I haven't heard any plausible argument that Noah's Ark would not work, while I think I have provided a powerful case that it would. With that, I concede my time.
You bet. Thank you very much, Nephilim Free, for your first rebuttal. We will now move into the rebuttal from the representative of Creationist Cat, and that will be for 8 minutes. I have the timer set for 8 minutes, and I will start it on your first word.
Sure. I'm just going to, because there's just a flood of, claims made. And later when we're having a back and forth, I'm going to be speaking more about, certain data that we know. I'm only going to touch really on one thing before I launch into what I really wanted to talk about in this portion. But he did mention a good deal. Why would tribes invent incorrect myths? I'm sure Neff doesn't believe in every religion and every myth on the face of the earth. He says that there's no reason to think they all have flood myths. Other than if there was an actual flood, when it's pretty much common sense that maybe every single, civilization on Earth has experienced either a tsunami or some sort of flood that was traumatic to them, and they built some sort of myth around it. It's really not implausible in the least to think that. What is implausible is to think that a global flood occurred, because we just simply don't have anything on record to substantiate that. If something like that were to occur, fresh water would have mixed with salt water, and every single sea creature just would have perished. Of course, the Bible does state that the flood itself killed off every crawling thing on the earth. So that sounds like, I believe fish are involved there. I don't know, but they would have just by pure science died because of, their ecosystems would have been destroyed. But what I really want to say here is what you've heard here is a series, yet again, of highly dubious arguments. Yeah, true. I did not really provide that much in terms of scientific data, but you know what? I mean, again, I'm not like here to prove. I'm really here representing the null hypothesis that he has to put up the proof that this is actually feasible. And I think that what we've heard is mostly highly dubious arguments. He is pointing to a lot of supposed historians and people who would really have no idea. Like they were not around during the flood. There were only 8 people left when that whole occurrence supposedly occurred. So, he is looking for answers in order to support his first premise. And I would say that he has invoked divine intervention, because he spoke of the animals all gathering to the ark and things like that. Now, I guess he can try and explain how that occurred without divine intervention, but that sounds to me like some sort of, because animals just don't do that on their own. Anyway, I could get into the weeds here and discuss all of these things, but I'd rather use this time to, come up with a theory of my own that I think is more plausible, that involves Noah's Ark. That I think that this is a way that we can all agree is a little more plausible than the what most creationists will use to substantiate the myth. And I actually have 2. The first is this: there was an alien mothership, and unbeknownst to Noah and his family, it was circling the Earth's atmosphere at the time of they're around the time that they started building the ship. Through its impressive futuristic technology, it was able to transmit to Noah the precise calculations he and his sons needed to do all the advanced calculus that had not been invented at the time in order to build such a ship. They put it in their brains, so they didn't have to worry about that. It teleported just abundant slabs of the finest timber continually near the site, because I believe, where were they? They were somewhere in the Middle East. Yeah. Trees were not abundant there. It zapped all the animals they needed for the journey mere days before they arrived, and then put them in a hibernation-like state so that they, wouldn't bother them while they were doing their thing. Otherwise, they just, like CC said, they'd just be boinking up a storm and, just probably like tearing each other apart. It would be a madhouse. So then when it was time to get them on the ship, they teleported them onto the ship, avoiding what would otherwise be hundreds, if not thousands of man hours just to get them situated on the ship. But then once the journey started, the aliens were really clever. They implanted a tiny mechanism in all 8 of the ship's inhabitants that allowed them to constantly be crapping out an army of tiny robots. The robots did the rounds. They took turns wiping away the poop and pee. Normally, I'd say piss and shit, but I know Neff is a Christian, so I'm going to try and keep it a little family friendly. They neutralize the poop instantly, avoiding the disease that would rapidly occur with the poop and pee, and saving the ship's crew the man hours that they simply didn't have, because cleaning up all that poop and pee, well, that's at least a solid minute for a large cage, maybe 10 seconds for small cages if we're extremely magnanimous here. At about 16,000 separate cages divided by 8 people, well, that's just far more time than there is in a day to clean up all that pee and poop. There's more that they would need to do. They would need to dispose of that nasty crap once it was accumulated. Each animal, if we say, this is a very conservative estimate, would probably have 1/4 of a cup of urine's worth of pee, just an average. And if you multiply that by about 16,000 animals, I mean, you're talking somewhere in the realm of 100 to 165 gallons of urine. That's a lot to collect, clean, and bilge pump in a day. So clearly, this is already a more sound proposition than what Neff is suggesting. Because, I mean, they needed time to do things like water the animals, feed them, find some sort of climate controlling mechanism that would somehow be perfect for this vast array of animals, all who need certain temperatures in order to survive, to cultivate fresh plants that each individual animal needed, to somehow keep an endless supply of fresh meat for the carnivores that wouldn't spoil, to keep the animals from getting crushed to death in their cages from the high impact rolling and rocking that the Ark was definitely doing during its tumultuous journey, and so much more. So, more robots were needed for these tasks, and they'd sometimes malfunction. So basically, Noah's family was pooping out these little robots the entire time. That's all they really needed to do. It was really tough on their colons. They got stretched out beyond comprehension, and it led to excruciating hemorrhoids. But these people had to sacrifice, it was the end of the world. They needed, a little teamwork was needed. So fortunately, the aliens provided them with a little preparation, H-like substance to help them along, as well as prune juice, which of course is always helpful to a 600-year-old man's continence. The ship was later joined by an army of other motherships. They flooded the Earth, because they were bored, I guess. Nothing especially good on intergalactic Netflix at the time. I don't know. I don't know their reasoning, I will admit. And they protected the Ark, steered it, zapped its existence off of Mount Ararat soon after it was abandoned, because, we haven't been able to find remnants of that shit. So, although fantastical, this is a more plausible story than the flood story, because I thought you were going to give me 2 minutes. You gave him you gave him a 2-minute warning.
Yeah, give him 2 more minutes if he wants it. I'm fine with that.
I don't have that much I just have a little bit more to go. Okay. So yeah, and in the future, I'd like a 2-minute warning.
Sorry, I missed it, but yes, you got it. 2 minutes. No
problem. So, although fantastical, this is far more plausible than the traditional explanation for the flood story, because it doesn't require everything that we know about geological data, animal behavior, and more to be untrue. It is operating, I will admit, in the same manner that Neff is. I'm starting with a premise, assuming it's true, and coming up with a series of somewhat implausible, actually, I guess you could say very implausible ways that it could have happened. But here's the thing. Neither you nor Neff can prove that it's untrue. Here's the second theory. Again, using the term loosely here. The Noah's Ark story never happened, and it's just a bunch of bullshit. It's a preposterous myth concocted by primitive men before they had any concept of science, and it was more than likely plagiarized and embellished from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates it, which itself is total bullshit. Folks, I'll allow you to pick and choose which of the two you find more plausible.
All right, there we go. So we will now move into the open discussion portion. So for that, want to let you know it'll be 25 minutes of open discussion. And so with that, gentlemen, I have the timer set, and I will give you that 2-minute warning once we're close to the end. I'll keep a closer eye on the clock. So thanks for your patience on that, and the floor is yours.
Okay, I have a question for you. You
Sure.
said salt water would have killed all the marine organisms because it would have destroyed their ecosystems. But you believe the oceans are already full of salt water, right? And you believe that they've been that way for hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah, the oceans are, but there are certain portions of the world that have fresh water, and that's just because of the fact that they. Where are you going with this, Neff?
Before the flood, the oceans probably had vastly less salt. I mean, secular science demonstrates that the oceans are becoming increasingly salinated. So there would have been far less salt in the oceans in the past. And adding the salt water, I don't see why it would have wiped out every.
Well, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why, because we're able to actually look at the Earth's surface, and we know that there are are rich mineral deposits. We know that there's an abundance of salt, and the idea that it just all of a sudden, I mean, where did all that salt suddenly come from, and where did all that water just suddenly disappear to? Was that God that did that? That just disappeared all that water?
Well, now, see, you have a built-in presumption that you presume that the amount of salt that was added to the oceans by the flood was immediately so high that it would wipe out the ecosystems of the world. That's not the creationist explanation. The creationist explanation is that the flood of Noah opened salt domes in the earth, or brought salt that was in the ocean out from in the earth, and the oceans have become, as secular science shows, increasingly salinated year after year after year. So you're presuming, hold on.
All right,
you're presuming that the amount of salt added by the flood immediately at that time would have been so much that it would wipe out all these creatures, but there's no science behind that.
Okay.
Position is that at the end of the flood,
allow me to rebut your before you say 10 million things.
At the end of the flood,
all right, Neff, is it pertinent to the, like, are you kind of finishing the same point, or moving to a different
finishing
one?
the very statement? At the end, creationists don't believe that at the end of the flood, the waters of the sea would have been anywhere near as salinated as they are today.
Okay, let's give him a chance. Go ahead.
There's absolutely no way that I can respond to a gish gallop of claims. So I would really appreciate it if there are claims made that I need, because I basically
I was only talking about one thing, not a gish gallop.
All right, 1 sec, Neff.
No. That was very much a gish gallop. I don't really I at this point I sort of forget exactly what I was going to say in response to. No, I was going to ask this. He invoked. He used the term secular science. So I am guessing that you do not trust. You look at it as this other thing. Now, creationist science, if we want to call it that, it's really not a recognized by respected journals or anything like that, or the wide, the overwhelming majority of conventional science, if I can call it that. So why is it, Neff, that if you are distrustful of secular science, you don't believe in long-term evolution, for instance, why believe any of it? Why are you invoking secular science if you don't believe in secular science?
Well, secular scientists can get things right, but they can also get things wrong. But I would ask you, where do you get? How is it that what data or idea do you have that at the end of the Noahic flood, the oceans would have been so immediately salinated at that time that the ecosystems of countless species of marine organisms. Hold on, let me finish my sentence now, please.
All right. Okay. All right.
That the salination of the oceans at the end of the flood of Noah would have been so great they would have wiped out millions of species. What science are you basing that on?
It's just pretty obvious because of the fact that we had, if you're going to argue that we did not have oceans at the time, we have a vast amount of data that we had, that we've had these oceans for millions of years. Hey, can I answer this question without you maybe mute him, please?
Neff, you got to give him a chance to respond.
Yeah. So it's just pure common sense that what is going to happen is that in a global flood, if you have freshwater bodies and saltwater bodies, that they are going to mix together. And because of the fact that there is just way more saltwater than there is freshwater, at the very least, it's easy to expect that all of the freshwater fish are going to die because they do not, you can't put a freshwater fish in a salty environment. So it's just really like, it's not a stretch. You're acting like this is, you're acting like this is a rather outlandish claim, and it's not in the least.
Yeah, well, there are plenty of species of fish that can adapt to salt water. I don't know if you've looked into that, but your idea about that is exactly wrong. And so again, you're still relying on a presumption that the amount of salt added to the oceans by the flood would have been so great that all the marine species would have gone extinct. You haven't based that on any science. And then did I hear you right? Did I hear you say that there was no oceans on the earth before the flood, or creationists believe this? Because
No,
I
no,
don't
no, no,
know
no,
Wait,
no,
creationists
one
believe
sec.
no,
that.
One sec. Just so we can let CC's representative have a chance to respond to each point. Before we go to that next one, Neff, I want to give him a chance to answer that first question. Or I think I should say you said that he wasn't using science. So before we go to the new topic, if you want to respond to that, CC. Or I should
I
say,
don't know how you can say that that isn't science. I mean, it's pretty. Maybe there are certain rare species of fish that can adapt to different environments, but that is not the overwhelming number. Like they're very ecosystems are not very tough things. They can be ruined quite easily by man-made interference and all sorts of disruptors. And yeah, as for his question about oceans, no. I was not saying that no oceans existed. I was saying I was asking if you were making some sort of claim that oceans, that saltwater oceans and fresh bodies of water did not exist before the flood. That's what I was doing. Of course, they existed.
Okay, so
This whole thing has been Neff asking me questions. Can I ask a question?
sure.
Okay. Sure. Well, I just, I do think that this kind of has to do with what we're talking about. And, why, if God was able to transmit because you're admitting, I mean, of course, that Noah was not a carpenter. And this was only for people who were not experienced. And then in ancient time. So why would God basically transmit to them the plans of this ark? Why not send them something that is way more technologically impressive? Why not send them plans for some sort of spaceship, or at least tell them how to forge metal in order to create this boat?
Okay. Well, the Bible says that men were are artificers of brass before the flood. So apparently, man already had metallurgy knowledge at that time. Now, I don't know. Your question is actually asking why would God instruct Noah to build the ark as it's described in the Bible? And I've given you strong reason to believe that the ship built, the ark built by Noah, according to the instructions God gave in the Bible, is a completely viable one. So I see that as a straw man. Now, I would point out that you said these salt water would have wiped out lots of species. In fact, we do actually believe that's what happened. I hope you're aware that all the creatures that live on this earth right now counts for about 1% of all the species that have ever lived on the earth. And the fossil record is 99.5% marine creatures. So there were many thousands of species of marine creatures which are extinct, in fact, recorded in the fossil record, that don't live today. So I would say the flood of Noah did precisely what you're claiming it should have done. Exactly. And, well done.
Okay. All right. And then, just by logical inference, we have to, if we accept that, we have to basically agree that within the span of about 2,000 years, about 16,000 species created 50 billion species. That is an insane amount of speciation. I mean, that just suddenly stopped.
Yeah. Well, now you're wanting to debate evolution, and that's not what the subject of this debate about.
Let's give him a chance to finish that point, just to be sure we got everything.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I suppose it does come into the the picture, because if you are kind of asserting again, like we're talking about, did the ark do the job in order to get to the society that we have today? And that necessitates there being an amount of animals that are capable of procreating and creating literally billions more species than were present on the ark. And all of that to happen inside a 2,000 to 3,000 year period. And then all of a sudden it just, this rapid expansion of species just kind of stops. It just does not sound that, plausible to me
Okay.
in the least.
Okay, so, well, creation can account for variation of the created kinds, and that accounts for all the species that exist. 200 breeds of dog from 2 dogs, from 2 lizards, you can get 90 different varieties of lizard. So, but again, you're wanting to debate evolution. I'll happily debate you about evolution anytime you like. But this debate is about, would Noah's Ark work? And we're talking about the ship. Would the ship be viable? Would it work? The design that Noah built, would it sustain the oceans? Could it do the job that was commanded to do? I think I've already made a case that it could. I've heard nothing from you.
Okay,
It could not. I'll happily debate you about evolution, speciation, or any other biological subject you like to at any time in the future. Just get in touch with you. Hold on, please.
Well, hold on.
I've been really patient with you, and you get on the mic and you talk for 4 or 5 minutes straight, and nobody interrupts you.
I don't think you realize that
I'm on the mic for
a while, sir.
Hold on.
I'm on the mic for 30 seconds, and you want to shut me off.
Hold on 1 sec. Okay, just if you can just summarize in 1 sentence, Neff, the point that you were. Okay, I think you had said that just to re-summarize that the debate isn't on evolution, and so if we want to give him a chance to respond, I know that you got other points that you want to bring up, Neff, but I just want to give him a chance to respond to that.
Well, these things are tangentially related. Again, I already said that we have to kind of prove that the ark was sufficient in order to create the world that we have today. So the number of animals that happen to be on it and the amount of time that we have from the supposed ark experience. And now, I mean, it's just relevant to the debate. So, can I move on to something else? Because
I have a question for you.
Well, wait. All I was doing was answing.
Well, you just clarified. I get to ask questions too, right?
Yeah.
So I have a question for you.
I've only asked one question.
I haven't asked any.
We've had at the start, Neff, you kind of started leading the discussion, and let's let CC's rep give his questions as well.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. Okay, you want to talk facts? We'll talk a few facts. I don't really think that I am kind of on the hook to do so, but okay, let's talk about how strong the ship was, okay? Because the Earth is approximately 200 million square miles, okay? And the height of Mount Everest is approximately 5.5 miles. The amount of water that is needed to be supplied and disposed of in the Great Flood is about 1.1 billion cubic miles. The amount of rain per second, therefore, that would have to be falling in order to generate 1.1 billion cubic miles of water over 40 days is almost unimaginable. It's the equivalent to 289 cubic miles per second. Now, how any non-divinely protected vessel could survive that is just beyond my comprehension.
Okay, so it seems to me that you're not familiar with the creation model. You're not familiar with what the Bible says about the flood. You think that the waters that flooded the earth came from the sky. That it was that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says in the 600th year of Noah's life, God split the earth open, and the waters that flooded the earth came from within the earth. According to the scriptures, it only rained for 40 days and nights. That's it. I don't know. Maybe you should investigate good things a little better before you. Hold on.
Okay.
Before you make an argument against them, because that doesn't work. Because the Bible doesn't say it rained for every day for a year, and even if it had, I don't see how that would negate the ark. So 40 days and nights is how long it rained. And the waters that flooded the earth came from within the earth, and the physical evidence of that is the mid-oceanic ridges on the ocean floor, from which hot water is still coming along out of the earth along them in the form of black smokers. They're called hydrothermal vents. So, but I'm not hearing an argument as how Noah's Ark would not be viable as for its function, how it would not, do its job. So I would ask you a question. I would ask, since this is your position, what science is there that shows that Noah's Ark made of wood, especially if you used very large timbers from very large trees? I don't think Noah would have been so stupid to make it out of toothpicks or those skinny pine trees. Surely he would have used massive timbers because there are massive trees on the earth. It only stands to reason an idiot would make a ship out of small timbers if he's going to build such a large ship for such a task. What science is there that shows us that structurally such an ark would not be up to the task.
Well, the Ark Encounter, which was created by over, I think, 1,000 people were consulted for that. It had hundreds of workers. They used cranes. They used bulldozers. They used all sorts of man-made instruments in order to create it. That Ark has flood insurance. You know why? Because it wouldn't be able to float if they put it in the water, or at least not for very long.
Are you aware that Noah wouldn't have built his ark like the one they built?
One sec, Neff. I know that it could be interpreted as the end of that point, but I just want to be sure, just so we give CC's rep a chance. Or you?
Well, this whole thing is like, this should be question answer question. I'm just constantly answering his questions, and I've only literally asked him one so far. So I wish that this could become a system in which I was asking a question and then he gets to ask a question.
Sure, we can do that. Is that okay with you, Neff? If we'll go back to you, Neff, for your question, but
yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right. Well, again, I think that, kind of certain philosophical questions are pertinent to this whole thing. And so, if God was able to conjure all of this, obviously he was able to just snap the world into existence, essentially, with the creation myth, which I'm sure you also believe. Then, why was saving the animals even necessary? I mean, why not just make them suddenly appear, disappear and then reappear with his God magic? Why not teleport all the animals into the future so that they didn't have to suffer for the sins of humanity? Because they didn't deserve that. They didn't do anything to deserve that.
Okay, so I don't know why God decided to save the creatures instead of recreating creatures. Nobody knows the mind of God, but I would say it does seem reasonable to me that the creation was a one-time event. And if God was going to save life, he would have had to save those things that he had already made. So, but now you ask why why would he not just snap his fingers? And why did they have to die? Well, the creatures of the earth provide a profound record of God's justice in the world. You're standing on 1,800 meters of it, sitting on it right now, a record of God's holiness and his sacrifice. In the ark represents Jesus Christ, a door we must go through to be saved, a record of the death that we deserve, which is found in the earth, and the ark being the way to survive. So I see a powerful theological reason why God might have done it. Now, I would ask you again, I don't see how this relates to Noah's Ark being a viable ship. I would ask you again to tell me what science is there that demonstrates Noah's Ark would not have been up to the task, could not have performed its task, and as a follow up to that, you mentioned. You mentioned Noah's Ark.
Is this relevant? Like, is it two questions?
It's part of the same question. You mentioned Noah's Ark created by answers in Genesis. I would ask, do you realize that Noah's Ark, the actual Noah's Ark, wouldn't have been built anything like the Ark building that Answers in Genesis built, which is, a showcase thing. Noah's Ark was
it would be a lot shoddier. It would, they were using much more up-to-date technology, and it would have been not that is any winner, but it would have been a hunk of shit compared to that thing.
Let's give him a chance to answer the first question, because you asked two, Neff.
Okay.
So you asked, this is the problem with so many, asking too many questions at a time. What was the other question? Did it had something to do with, what are scientific reasons why I believe that the Ark could not have been viable? Is that was that?
Well, you're taking the position that it's not, and
yeah, of course I am.
So, Neff, if you can just repeat the question, just so we can remember it.
Yeah.
And
what science is there that shows that Noah's Ark wouldn't have been up to the task? to survive
Well,
the
I mean,
oceans.
what science is there to show that it would? Because the thing is that engineering requires training in advanced mathematics and
Okay,
physics. And
I'll answer
wait,
that question.
no, you won't. You're going to let me speak because you haven't been letting me speak, dude. All right. So it requires training in advanced mathematics and physics, and there is no getting around it. Plain and simple. Fields such as calculus and general physics were not discovered till around the 1700s. Engineering a ship as massive as the Ark would require those skills. So, I mean, just that right off the bat, expecting these like prehistoric people, I mean, I guess it's not technically prehistoric, but close to it, who had no knowledge of these things. I mean, let me ask you this, Neff. Do you think that these that they actually had the technology at the time, or do you think that God just transmitted them the plans on how to do this perfectly?
Okay, so you implied that calculus and advanced engineering skills are needed. I don't see any reason why Noah wouldn't have been intelligent enough to do it. What science is there that shows that calculus is necessary to measure boards and cut them, plane them, and put them together with iron rivets? How do you have to know calculus to do that?
It's not that simple, my dude. There's so many things that have to do with building a ship that is approximately the size of the Titanic. You're making it sound like you're building a canoe, dude. I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I can't just kind of like pick all of these things out of the air and kind of mention them perfectly. But reading over things, unfortunately I don't have a photographic memory, but as I was reading, there were all these very technical, precise things that had to be done. And I'll mention, there was a ship that the largest ship, because the one ship that you mentioned, the Yang Ha, there's no decent like evidence for that thing, but there is what like do. Okay, do you want me to stop and I'll ask you a question, or?
I'd like to respond to the things that you've said. You said
don't end with a question.
You said we're not building, we're building a big ship. I just don't see any reason to believe that somebody has to know calculus to cut wood and plane it and bolt it together with iron rivets. Noah's Ark was a box. It wasn't shaped like a modern ship. It didn't have to steer anywhere. It was a box. That's what the word ark means. It means a box. So I think it's a complete straw man to say Noah would have had to have known calculus. And secondly, how do you know Noah didn't know calculus? It's likely that Noah had an IQ because he lived before the flood, vastly higher than you and me will ever have. But I don't see any requirement for knowing calculus to build an ark out of wood. Just doesn't make any sense. That to me is a complete straw man argument.
We'll give hold on one. How is
that a straw man? Who am I straw manning by like just assuming that a structure that would have to undergo the most traumatic event that any structure has had to endure, that it would have to adhere to like shipbuilding, especially when you're building large ships. There is a science to it. People go to college and get advanced degrees to be able to do these things.
I'm not hearing an argument why you need calculus to do it, though.
Hold on, let's just give him a chance for a finish.
I've given the argument. Your argument is an argument from incredulity. You're just saying that like, oh no, it's just easy to throw a few planks of wood together and not much is really needed for that. Calculus wasn't even invented, dude.
You didn't tell us why calculus is necessary.
1 sec. Let's give him a chance to finish. Then we'll go to.
Maybe ask me that question later. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not a scientist, but I know that it's needed. I know that it's needed.
You know it's needed, but you don't know why.
1 second. We'll go to the next question. So, whoever last, forgive me, I'm just keeping up with questions in the live chat. So whoever asked the last question, if we want to switch over for the other person to ask one, we might have. Okay, we just ran out of time. So with that, we want to go to the Q&A. Thanks so much for your questions. And with that, I will start reading them as fast as I can. Thanks so much. I'm sorry, Wilson. They said, Neff, why is it that Noah and his family of 7 people were able to build the ark by hand, but Ken Ham couldn't recreate the same ark without modern technology, or with modern technology and a build team, steel and concrete?
Well, Noah's Ark, built by Answers in Genesis, is a mock-up of Noah's Ark, and there was teams of construction workers that built it. Why would we believe that Noah and 3 sons would be the only persons that built the Ark? Surely Noah could have employed however many people he wished to before the flood. He might have had a team of 300 men to help him doing it, and he might have had 50 or 100 elephants to help him pull the timbers, for what we know. So we just don't know. But if you're going to make that argument, I think the argument is self-refuting, because if the mock-up of Answers in Genesis, which they're pointing to, was built by teams of human beings, then to point to Noah's Ark and claim that Noah and his 3 sons alone had to have built it, I don't see that as as plausible. On top of that, the Bible tells us Noah took 100 years to build it, so he had plenty of time.
Just real quickly, I mean, I'm sure that there are other sites out there, but if you're interested, you could go to PassyWorldOfMathematics.com. They have a section that talks about the science behind building ships, things like the Archimedes floating principle, as well as the geometry of hulls and stabilizers, things having to do with ship stability, something called plasmoline, and the mathematics of loading ships. I mean, all of these things would have been relevant. His assertion that that calculus and just a whole wide variety of knowledge that was not available at the time would in fact be needed, just I think is a testament to his ignorance.
The Ark of Noah model has been tested and found that it's the perfect dimensions for ship faring. 6-to-1 ratio. 6-to-1 ratio. Excuse me. 6-to-1. No, by shipbuilders. 6-to-1 ratio is the perfect stability, perfect dimensions for stability, and that was probably 2,500 years before man figured out how to make a ship to that dimensions, or began making one to those dimensions. So Noah got it right long before modern man did.
We're going to go to the next question, and I know you have, Vadim probably have a response. I don't doubt that, but just to try to get through as many as we can.
Okay.
Stephen Steen, thanks for your super chat. He says, get to see James's webcam 2 nights. God is good. I don't know what there aren't any other nights. I think you're a pervert, but thank you for your super chat. He has another one. He says, Team Neff for Prez, Neff 2020. Maybe
I'd give him my vote over Trump's. Just
so you got a couple of fans, Neff.
The memes would be even greater.
Brian Stevens, thanks for your super chat. He said the calculations alone on food are over yours. I think he's talking to Neff. He's saying that the calculations of food, there would actually be much more needed. He says, you claim 26,950 cages for animals. They were on the ark for around 300 days. If each animal eats 1 pound of food a day, that is 4,042.5 tons, which is more than 10 747s. The calculations alone on food are over yours. I'm assuming this for Neff.
Okay, so I've already provided the. Let's see. I hope I'm screen sharing. The interior space. If Noah used massive timbers 10 feet by 10 feet by 50 feet long to build the ark, the interior space of the ark would be 646,800 square feet, and that's if all walls of it were numerous feet thick, solid wood. Not multiple layers of wood, not wood boards, solid wood, several feet thick, and the interior space all the way around would still be equal to over 500,000 square feet. So,
and how would they keep this food from rotting? How would they keep this food from rotting? And how would they keep?
Excuse me. And the ark was 3 levels tall. It had 3 interior levels. you can actually fit 3,000 railroad cars inside or Noah's in that space. So I don't see it as a problem that Noah couldn't have brought the appropriate amount of food, especially if he brought adolescent animals, which would be the smart thing to do.
Can I respond to his answer?
Well, okay, so let me respond to that. So if
Wait.
well, I'm addressing the question as asked. The question was about pounds, right? Weight, right?
I just have relevant
Okay,
things
so I'll address that then, because that was asked. So, sure, yeah, real quick. Okay, yeah, yeah, I can do it super quick. One 10-foot by 10-foot by 50-foot board of wood has the potential to support 1,800 tons. Noah would have used hundreds, if not several thousand of these. I don't see how strength is a problem.
Okay, I'll just say two things as quickly as I can. One, if we have baby animals, that presents all sorts of problems that, it sounds like it solves some problems, but it really creates more problems than it solves, because baby animals have very special needs. They need to be nurtured. Most animals need mother's milk. It's much harder to feed them than it is to feed a somewhat grown animal. And then as for this food, what about refrigeration? A lot of these animals were carnivores. How is meat not going to spoil in just a few weeks? That's being generous.
I would say they didn't need meat.
Hold on one.
Well, but we know that there is such a thing as carnivores. So you're completely twisting just everything that we know about the animal kingdom in order to kind of, again, like that does not cut scientific muster. It really doesn't.
I don't see that.
Neff, I'm really sorry. Just to get through as many questions as
All
we
right,
can.
let's go to the next. Let's go to the next.
We got C. Darwin. Thanks for your question. They asked, thanks for your super chat. He said, Nephilim free, could Noah have used independent escorts to help with the ark construction?
So Noah could have used other forms of protein. He doesn't need meat. A carnivore will eat whatever he's got available to him. I'm not going to answer questions that are intended to slander me personally. It's just no point in that.
Oh, okay.
But atheists have been playing that game. They've been called everything from a rapist to a pedophile. Because I talk about God.
We'll just move to the next question. I didn't realize that it was a troll question. Sorry about that. Maynard Saves, thanks for your super chat. This new question is, where did the oxygen come from with the earth covered in water? The atmosphere would be so saturated they would drown trying to breathe.
Well, I don't see any reason to believe the atmosphere would have been so saturated with water. It rained 40 days and nights. People in India, when they experience a monsoon in northwestern India, they don't all drown because it's raining day after day after day. And the waters that flooded the earth came from within the earth. They're still in the oceans today. So that's just I think a question molded from somebody who hasn't actually thought out what their what's in their mind.
I'd just like to ask Neff real quickly, in terms of the baby animals, are you suggesting that the animals...
I thought we were in a Q&A section now.
I know, but,
Time for that
I haven't had a chance to really, I didn't come here to just sit around and not participate.
Well, we're in the question and answer section.
I know, but I don't think that people are going to have a problem with me kind of chiming in on some of these things, and I want to get you to elaborate on this. It's just a question.
Neff, if it's relevant to the question, I think it's fine. Just because he hasn't really gotten a lot of Vadim hasn't really gotten a lot of questions, and so just to give him a chance to kind of be engaged during the Q&A.
Okay, sure. Well, I didn't get to ask too many questions myself.
Yeah, you did. I want to go back to the baby animals. I'm just curious if you think that the baby animals themselves made the journey to Noah's Ark or if parents came there, then copulated and gave birth to babies and then just died.
Yeah, I believe God brought the animals, as what the scriptures say. He brought them there. So I think adolescent examples of the creatures came to Noah. All things are possible with God. God can do whatever he chooses. If God can create a human being, genetic information, algorithms, and linguistics to define every living thing on the planet and snap his fingers and the universe come into existence, I don't see any problem with God directing animals to the ark.
So you have no problem. You don't see any problem with like a sloth journeying, what would be probably at least 14 years. I mean, it's not going to be a baby by the time it reaches the ark.
Well, that's presuming that you're presuming that it took a long time for them to get there. From where? Where exactly did they come from? Tell us how you know.
Well, because where they happen to live right now is very far. I forget actually like the areas that they're indigenous to, but it's like I read a calculation that they go about 5 feet per minute, and that it would take a minimum of 14 years, unless they're swimming. They're actually surprisingly decent swimmers. However, they're not going to be able to cross an entire ocean. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
There were no ocean creatures, no marine animals on the ark. No marine animals on the ark.
Yeah, but a sloth isn't a marine animal.
Right. So the sloths came to the ark. You're presuming that you're presuming that the sloth had to be in 550 miles away or something to get to the ark. You're just based everything on presumptions that the animals couldn't have been relatively close. He only had to have 8,000. Again, had to have 8,000.
Again, I can make the presumption that Noah pooped out little robots in order to clean the entire ark and take care of all of the tasks. I can presume a lot of things.
Well, we can discuss those things too.
Hold on, Neff. You got to let him finish, Neff.
Okay, but as for sloths, they primarily live in South America, so that's a far journey to the Middle East. So yeah, there you go. Anyhow, next question.
Next up, we have, I'm sorry, Wilson, thanks for your super chat. He said, James, if it's not metaphorical gel or theoretical gel, what kind of gel would it be? I'm pretty sure that's a troll chat for G-Man, unless either of you guys understood what that is.
I have no clue what that's about.
I think that's making fun of poor G-Man. You guys, come on, leave G-Man. Okay, so anyway, Brian Stevens, thanks for your question, super chat. He says, Neff ignores questions and just asks new ones. Neff, if you want to respond, you can.
I thought I answered every question that was posed to me, and I asked a few myself. So I think if you watch this debate over again, you'll see that's not true.
Gotcha. Next, we will go to some of the questions. I'm so sorry, just to keep our promise in terms of time to the speakers, because we're grateful to have them here. They were willing to come volunteer when I reached out to them, and so we really appreciate it. I don't want to go over their time, so we won't get to all the questions. I'm sorry about that. But CP Dad...
So I didn't get one question? You guys are lame! All right, just had to say that. No, I love you guys. I really do. Thanks for tuning in.
Wait, we do have...
I'm just sad I didn't get a question.
I scrolled through. I did find one. It's at the bottom. Praise I am that I am. My question to creation, or technically, praise I am that I am. It's Vadim, the representative of CC. He says, my question is, has he ever researched Johann Huber's, because he made an exact replica of the Ark with the precise specifications and sailed it. Johann Hubers is the guy he's asking if you've heard of.
I have not heard of this gentleman, and I'm interested in looking at this. I wish I knew kind of what the. I have no clue. I hear these like weird sorts of claims all the time, and maybe it's a situation where he sailed it, and the thing will, totally wasn't like a decent boat. Also, I'm sure that it was not subject to the conditions that Noah's Ark was. And then this could potentially be something that's just a myth. So I don't know. I will look it up though. Thank you.
You bet. And next up, thanks for that question. And CP Dad asked, did the flood raise up levels of water into the atmosphere, and did it have an effect into the Earth climate change?
Well, the environment was changed dramatically by the arc. Even secular scientists admit the Earth was globally tropical from pole to pole, North Pole, Antarctic, and Arctic. There are marine fossils in mountains in the Antarctic, ferns, and dinosaur fossils on top of mountains in the Antarctic. So the Earth was globally tropical prior to the flood. The flood of Noah changed that, and that's why the fossil record shows so many examples of creatures which were capable of growing to massive sizes that they can't achieve today. Dragon flies with 2.5 to 4 foot wingspan, centipedes 6 feet, 7 feet long, gigantic lizards, very much like an iguana, but weighed several tons, and the fossil, camels that were twice as big as they are today.
Okay, this seemed to be an open question. So can I answer as well?
Definitely.
The flood absolutely did change the environment of the Earth according to the geological science.
Okay, well, really the only thing that I want to add is, I would assume that there would be because it would just be pumping so much water into the atmosphere, and that just, it seems like it would change that. But really, I just want to point out that once again, Neff is citing quote unquote secular science. And I think he knows very well that the actual claims that secular science, there's really just science, folks. It's not secular science. But really, the claims that he's talking about, he's referring to some things that are true at points, but these things happened over millions of years. So once again, Neff is just cherry picking what bits of secular science he thinks is relevant and true, and what he doesn't. It's a very convenient thing to do.
Well, I'd like to respond to that. Secular scientists can get some things right and they can get some things wrong. They get a lot of things right, but they get a lot of things wrong too. So, there's such thing as good science and there's bad science.
Mm-hmm. Next up, just to speed through as many as we can, Squigs Sky Tower, thanks for your question. It is a question for Neff, and we'll give Vadim a chance to respond. He says, why do you think Noah should have a higher IQ than anyone we have now?
Okay, that question was for me, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, because if the lifespan of mankind dropped dramatically after the flood, that indicates something is really going on biological in a very dramatic way with human beings. Noah lived to be 600 years old when the flood occurred. He lived many decades, I think as much as a century after that, actually. And so, and if you look at scripture, you see that the man's lifespan dropped to 600, then 400 something, 200 something years, and ultimately to 120 years within like 2 generations after the flood of Noah. Then it indicates something dramatic happened. And again, I point to the fossil record, which shows the creatures grew to enormous size before the flood. So obviously the antediluvian world had an environment that was vastly superior to the environment we have today for organisms being able to express their biological best that they can possibly be according to the information in their genomes. And so we are not the biological best that we can be today. No animal is, because of the flood of Noah, the changes to the environment. So, and that's testified to by the fossil record. I don't need to appeal to anything else. I don't need to appeal to the Bible for that. The geological science or paleontological
All right, can I get in?
Verifies that.
Just to get through, Neff, I'll let you finish in like 5 seconds.
Sure.
The only reason is hold on, just 1 sec, just so we can get to as many questions as possible. If you can wrap it up in like 5 seconds now.
Sure, I can. Sure. So I would tie in. I would say that the size of creatures that living in the past is directly related to their ability to express their genetic best, and that would relate directly to intelligence as well.
Thank you very much. And then Vadim, go ahead.
The only thing that I want to say is this is actually one of the few things that maybe I do agree with Neff on, because, it does make sense that if there were only 8 human beings left after they left the ark, and they all had to just, commit, like, what is it called? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word. Just basically inbreed over and over. Just a lot of fucking was going on. Basically, like if really the all of humanity stemmed from just 8 human beings, at best we'd probably all look like the banjo player from Deliverance. I think we'd look more like the hideous mutant cannibals in the 90s horror film U-Turn, the kind of elephant man looking creatures. And yeah, we probably would have very, very low IQs, far lower than we have right now, if that happened to be true. Thank God it wasn't.
Gotcha. Thanks for your guys' responses. And Bunny2007 Nessa, thanks for your question. First time I think I've seen you here. We appreciate your question. They said, how did king crabs survive the flood, Nephilim free?
Well, there's no reason to believe that the flood would have wiped out all species. This is just, I think, a false argument that comes from the atheists, that because the earth was flooded, all marine organisms had to have perished in the flood. I don't see that as true. Certainly, the science shows that 1% of the creatures that is what we have today. 95.5% of all fossils are marine fossils, and there are thousands and thousands of species that existed in the past that are extinct today, that exist as fossils that don't live in this world today. So the flood absolutely did wipe out many species. Many species did die. Many species survived for a time and died after the flood, and some species went extinct almost immediately. Those that simply couldn't cope with it probably went extinct right away.
Gotcha. We'll give you a chance to respond, Vadim, if you'd like to.
I was looking up because Neff, what in the Bible do you cite that says that not everything was, because it was my understanding that it wiped out everything in existence other than what was in the ark.
Right. So you should read the Bible and see what it says about it. The Bible says that everything that creeped on the earth perished. It doesn't say that everything that lived in the seas perished. It says everything that crept on the earth that had the breath of life in it perished in the flood. So that's all land-dwelling animals, and okay. That doesn't include every marine species.
Right, but they would have died out because of the salt water and fresh water.
Millions did. Millions.
We established before, but
right, millions did.
Yeah. I would like to ask Neff. So, what do you have to refute my aliens proposition?
Well, everything, I think. It's implausible to believe aliens had anything to do with this, since the Bible proves itself to be God's inspired word, and since the science of geology verifies there was a flood of Noah. Okay, so I don't see. We already have the best possible explanation is already available to us.
Right. Okay, but you're starting with the presumption that the Bible is God's word.
No, I don't presume it. I know it demonstrates it to us.
No, but that is a presumption.
No, it's not a presumption. It's verified by the text.
It's absolute.
No, it's not presumption. I can show you in another debate if you like.
I could say that I know that the Lord of the Rings to be true, and then obviously I don't believe that.
Do you know that mayonnaise exists?
Or I could say that any.
Do you know that mayonnaise exists, or do you presume it? You know that mayonnaise exists because you can observe. You can observe. Hold on. You can observe and test for mayonnaise, right? Well, we can observe and test for the flood of Noah.
If you ask him a question, though, you got to give him a chance to respond, Neff. Neff, if you ask him the question about mayonnaise existing, you have to give him a chance to respond. So, Vadim, if you want to respond to that.
Yes, I do believe mayonnaise exists. It's delicious. It's just an excellent condiment on sandwiches. And I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Miracle Whip. So, but as for what he's getting at, no, you cannot test like we've never had those conditions, and no one has ever created a boat. Like again, that person mentioned someone, I don't know what they're referring to, but it just it has not been replicated. That is just
in the laboratory.
One sec, let's give him a chance to finish.
In a laboratory,
numerous times.
A life-size Noah's Ark was created.
No, not the Ark. No, laboratory experiments and sedimentology and hydrology have been performed numerous times, verifying that the strata in the Earth were produced by rapidly moving water, producing individual strata with particle size distribution. That's a science fact.
Yeah.
We, just try to respect everybody's time. Thank you very much for being here, everybody. We want to let you know, a reminder that our speakers have their links in the description. So if you enjoyed what you heard, you can conveniently check out.
I thought we had ending statements.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. You're right, and I'm a total failure. Oh, sorry. We'll give each speaker 5 minutes to kind of draw together the strings of their case or the debate as a whole. So sorry about that, friends. We jumped right from the discussion to the Q&A, but sometimes we've had the closings after the Q&A. So not a problem. What we're going to do is set the clock for 5 minutes, and then we will start with Neff, given that he's taking the affirmative. So with that, want to say, Neff, I got the clock set for 5 minutes, and thanks for your patience, guys. The floor is yours, Neff.
Okay, so I didn't hear any valid argument that that structurally the ark wouldn't have been up to the task. I gave strong evidence that Noah would have been smart enough and had the available materials to build an ark that would have been profoundly strong, made of wood, and I've shown that. Even a scientific test performed on wood, where timbers only 6 inches wide, 4 feet tall, 72 feet long, supported 72,000 pounds. And Noah certainly would have been smart enough to use the cores of giant trees to build timbers for the ark, and those would have supported numerous tons. So there has been no argument about my opponent has really kind of avoided the subject of giving a valid argument for why the Ark of Noah would not be structurally up to the task. His arguments are all things surrounding that subject, but not directly related to it. I keep hearing this thing about calculus. It doesn't take calculus to build a box out of wood. There's simply no reason to believe Noah would have had to have used calculus. Now, Noah certainly would have been smart enough to do whatever I think was needed to be done. Mankind was likely smarter in the past, and if we look at ancient technology, we see that the ancients were able to build irregular stone walls of stones that fit together so tightly around the world that you can't fit paper in between each of the blocks. So, and able to move stones that weighed upwards of 3,000 tons and build foundations for buildings like the temple in Baalbek. And so ancient man was not stupid. And anyway, we have no reason to believe that. You need to be an evolutionist to believe the ancient man was stupid. So, or rather less intelligent. The opposite is likely true. Noah would have been likely smarter than we are. So there's no argument's been given as to why calculus is necessary to measure things, to weigh things, or even to test wood. Scientists don't need calculus. Simple mathematics will do. So no argument there. My opponent has talked a lot about geology and about the flood surrounding things, but not the ark and why it wouldn't have been up to the task. I want to address this on what to do about the waste. He says, I think Noah would have been smart enough to have drop chutes in the cages, so that instead of shoveling anything, all he had to do is use a broom and push the feces to the drop box, and it would automatically drop down to the bottom floor. It would have been a snap for him to clean the cages this way. All he would need is a push broom, and the dung goes right in the hole and drops down and collects itself. Noah would have been very smart and would have used a very simple technology would have been necessary. Is all that would be necessary to account for these things. And on top of that, if he needed materials for energy, he could in fact collect feces from animals if he wished to, and throwing it into a big box that has a ventilation shaft to it going out and let it dry. Of course, we know that feces makes excellent fire starter, and you can use it as coal to make a fire. And he said carnivores were necessary, were on the ark. Well, yes, creatures that are carnivorous today was certainly on the ark, and they would probably have been carnivorous then. But I guarantee you, if you put a carnivore in a cage and you give him food and it's not meat, he gets hungry enough, he's going to eat it. And you don't have to have meat to get protein. Vegetable matter can provide protein. Beans and nuts provide a very high level of protein. If a dog can eat kernels of man-made stuff and get all the protein he needs and not eat an animal, well, certainly any other creature could eat that too. So Noah could have had all the food he wanted to without refrigeration. Don't need refrigerators. So I really don't have too much else to say, except that I've heard a lot of speculations, a lot of assumptions. I've asked several times for scientific arguments that Noah's Ark wouldn't have been viable, wouldn't have been up to the task. I've heard not one reason, not one scientific reason, or even a valid good argument why Noah's Ark wouldn't have been up to the task. And I've provided some very good evidence that Noah's Ark would have been structurally stronger than necessary to do the job. And then we hear straw man arguments like, look at Answers in Genesis thing, but it was built to be a massive museum in a hotel, not to ride in the oceans. Noah's Ark wouldn't have been built that way. So I've heard of several straw man arguments, and I just haven't heard any argument pertaining to the subject as to why Noah's Ark would have been unviable, could not have stood up to the task. And I think I've given sufficient reason to believe that it was because of the building materials available to Noah. And with that, I conclude.
Okay, I'll go ahead then.
You bet.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't throw out too much data, but I know that no matter what I said, that it would be, just dismissed, because I did throw out things there. I actually did throw out actual calculations inside some of the funny stories that I threw in. But then I talked about things like, I had mentioned the fact that things like the Archimedes floating principle, geometry of holes and stabilizers, things like ship stability, all of these things are very much needed. One very much needs the skills of calculus and various sciences in order to achieve these things. I, at a certain point, was talking about the surface area of the Earth and how many square miles it is, and the height of Mount Everest, and how much water would need to be supplied, and therefore how much rain per second would have to be generated in order to fill the Earth, which is 1.1 billion cubic miles of water over 40 days. I mean, I threw out all those things, okay? And I could continue doing this. I could continue saying things like, I could invoke the common anti-Noah's Ark argument that, for instance, if you go to any archaeological site, or if you go to, say, the Grand Canyon and you drill into the sediment, if you look hard enough, you're going to find fossils that are arranged in a very specific order, that this is due to these animals dying out over millions of years and layers of sediment building. Layer by layer, if you do this, you're going to find a certain array of mostly extinct species, but what you won't find anywhere in the world is an area where all of these known fossilized species are just clustered all together in the same exact general area, which is exactly what we'd expect to find if there was some sort of cataclysmic event like the Great Flood. But screw that, okay? I'm not going to do it. Dignifying this ignorant story with an abundance of scientific facts is almost an insult to science itself. I think at a certain point, that which should not be taken seriously should not be treated seriously. No matter how many facts I blurted out over, very few people who are watching this currently who are convinced of the myth, including Neff, are going to be susceptible to believing those facts. And I don't hold any scientific degrees, so I'm not the one to be doing it if it's to be done. But hopefully, at least I've planted the seed of curiosity in some to question this, to kind of say, yeah, this is kind of absurd, so that hopefully somewhere down the line, some people will start to think about the absurdity of this ignorant story. Now, I just have a little bit more to say. There are many out there who believe aspects of the Bible and view this story in a figurative sense. And I want to say I'm so
2 minutes.
glad that you people exist. What did you say?
2 minutes.
Okay, that's perfect. I'm just really super glad that you guys exist. But I have to admit that even if you do look at it in that way, I think you're hard pressed to find true good in this story. I mean, an all powerful, all knowing God creates hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, allows them to turn into these monsters that he must eradicate. This being, I mean, this had to be something that was known the moment that he supposedly created the heavens and the earth, that this moment would occur because he's an all-knowing God, right? That's just what the Bible states. So it really conjures a vision of a sadistic child sitting at an anthill roasting ants with a magnifying glass, smashing them, pouring boiling liquid over them, and then just pissing all over it. Except these aren't ants. These are human beings. And there's infants. What do these infants do to deserve this? So, it fosters a very perverse outlook on the nature of man, how disposable it is, and I do not believe that a born human being is disposable. This story is a farce. Arguments from incredulity are considered usually a fallacy, but there are certain claims that stretch the limits of credulity to their breaking point that are so absurd that they're just an insult to rationality, and this is one of them. There's simply no way that masses of people would entertain this myth if it wasn't included in a text that hit the religious lottery and just happened to catch on with society. If the Bible existed without that story and it was proposed to most creationists, they'd say that it was as preposterous as the countless flood myths from other historical societies and indigenous peoples that they largely say are ridiculous. So I guess I'll just say in closing, please help spread the alien anal butt robot theory I proposed earlier. I think it's a really, I think it could catch on. And nothing makes cash like a religion. So if you need a guru or someone perhaps to hire for weddings, bar mitzvahs, gender reveal parties, if you need someone to spread the gospel, I'm your man. Find me on Twitter or just through Creationist Cat. Thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, just not in a weird way.
Thanks so much, gentlemen, for being here for your closing statements, and want to remind everybody their links are in the description. So if you enjoyed what you heard tonight, you can conveniently access their channels below. Also, want to mention, forgive me, I know that some of the questions we didn't get to. I'm sorry about that. Do want to mention, though, somebody gave a great idea because we're trying to build a Patreon, and we're like, well, if we're going to start a Patreon, we'd love feedback. So what would you value? What would mean something to you if you're going to consider becoming a Patreon supporter? So one thing I just want to show you really quick is if you look at, I'm going to pull up just really fast, a share screen. I realize I've never actually done share screen as a moderator. This is the first time. Basically, I just want to show what we're doing here for our Patreon. If you didn't have your question asked tonight, one thing we do have is switching this over. That's embarrassing. Mail, and it's working now, so hopefully the audio has been suitable for you. So thanks for being here, everybody. We appreciate it. And any last words from the debaters? As we just want to say thanks again and let everybody know their links are in the description.
No, just thanks for having me, and Neff, it's been a pleasure and a sheer sensation. I'm going to have myself a baby watermelon, folks.
Thanks, James. I appreciate you having me for debate. It was a pleasure to meet you, CC, and hope we can debate about something else in the future.
We'll see.
Maybe
Yeah.
this evolution that you believe.
I would be open.
That would be fun.
Thanks
Yeah.
so much. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable, everybody. Take care.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
The events of Noah's flood are laid out in Scripture. Though different theories exist on exactly how the event occurred, the problem I see is that the theories are so busy competing with one another that they lack the ability to see how well they work in conjunction with one another. In this video, you will see a conglomeration of many models which together all take care of the potential issues that critics might bring forward. The story of Noah's flood exists around the world. Cultures and people everywhere have told stories of it. But rather than just use that as evidence, let's use physical evidence instead. Here's the question. When did the supercontinent known as Pangaea break to form the continents that we see today? What initially happened was the moon circling the Earth was pulling constantly at the Earth's crust, as it does today. However, before the flood occurred, the waters under the surface of the crust were building up in pressure because of this magnetic pull. Unable to withstand, the fountains of the great deep broke forth. When the mid-Atlantic ridge broke open, the new continents formed their own breakaway plates, which sank as the waters rushed out. This lowered the already minimal mountains that were on the Pangaea continent. According to Genesis, the Garden of Eden was a lush paradise, one for eternal life, worldwide vegetarianism, and complete harmony with our Creator, mankind, and the beasts of the field. There was no bloodshed, disease, or even death. Neither plants nor trees even had thorns or thistles. Man was created to live forever. It was only sin that brought death into the world and broke apart this harmony. This is what is referred to as the fall. We disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit. From that time and on, sickness, death, and disease has entered the world, mutations building up every generation, leading slowly to man's demise. All the while, people blaming God for cancer, while it was man's rebellion that led to this. The universe and Earth itself began to decay, and within just 2,000 years after the fall of man, humanity had turned so corrupt and so wicked that God sent the flood as a judgment against us, for God saw that the wickedness of man was great, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." God instructed Noah to make an ark, a word that means box or chest, to specific dimensions, materials, and construction. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah and his family entered the ark, along with 2 of every kind of land animal. And then, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month and the 17th day of the month, the fountains of the great deep broke forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. These 2 events occurring began the first day of a series of events that changed the history of Earth and mankind itself. Giant rifts or tears ran thousands of miles across the planet. This is where the fountains of the great deep broke forth. jetting it into the atmosphere, along with massive amounts of stones and debris from the Earth's crust. All of these things would have been bombarding the canopy that surrounded the Earth, reflecting them back into the Earth's surface, causing even more destruction and turmoil, until eventually one of the projectiles would be strong enough to fracture and break apart the firmament. And the water fell back to the Earth as intense global rain. The moon itself bears witness of this, as the moon does not rotate, yet what faces us shows clear evidence of bombardment from the very projectiles shot out from the Earth during the flood. And we also have evidence for this as well. Ask yourself, where was Earth's oldest rock found? That's right, it was found on the moon during the Apollo mission. The evidence that the global flood brought on the Ice Age is abundant. One such example is rapid freezing. Reports describe the apparent near-instant freezing of a flowing river found buried in the frozen ground with fish frozen in place. Rivers do not freeze instantly, they freeze from the top down. The ice insulates the flowing water below, which prevents complete freezing. Here's another great report. 50 oxen were found, trapped in a remote frozen river. They were found attempting to cross when the river froze instantly. It froze them in place, alive, and they were unable to escape. How could a river freeze so quickly that a large, powerful animal could not exit in time? An entire herd of them. And what were they running from? Other findings in the Arctic also indicate rapid freezing. You see, it was a lush, temperate region, not a frozen wasteland from an ice age that was lasting thousands of years. The evidence for this is everywhere. Barren Axel Heiberg Island and Ellesmere Islands have been discovered to harbor a vast array of temperate animals and vegetation, which are now buried under the snow. Note that some animals recovered are burrowing animals that could not dig into rock-hard permafrost. Others are cold-blooded. Large trees were also found. Even more recently, giant camels have been found up in the north as well. In fact, vast frozen, non-fossilized forests that once thrived in the now barren Arctic Circle continue to surface as summer runoff erodes and releases the timber from the frozen muck. Driftwood of large non-native trees released from the seafloor still washes up on the shores of remote islands north of Siberia. Northward flowing rivers erode the muck below and see driftwood collect along their shores as it is carried out to sea. Because there are almost no trees growing now at these latitudes, the natives use these trees for fuel and building material and for burning. Oil drilling in northern Alaska commonly penetrates what is described as a flattened, unfossilized forest under hundreds of feet of frozen muck. There is a glaring problem with this. The frozen trees are not native to the Arctic. These tree species only grow in comparative forest thousands of miles to the south, where it is tropical and warm, proving that this region was also tropical and warm before the flood hit. But the problem is more than just the cold temperatures. These trees need a certain amount of sunlight just to live. And these latitudes do not provide sunlight for these trees to ever have grown, even if the temperatures were right. There is a reason that these trees show such barren landscapes. Trees do not do well there. The Antarctic also reveals similar evidence that the climate was much warmer. Large deposits of coal and oil indicate large forests and life lived there at one time. Dinosaur fossils also indicate warmer climate. Remember, these indications of rapid and permanent freezing of temperate to tropical flora and fauna are spread over 2 continents, and the type of flora recovered could never grow at the extreme latitudes they are found in. So simple climate change cannot account for what we observe. Therefore, any theory must explain how these plants grew and how they received the solar light from the sun to support them. The evolutionary theory fails 100% in this area. Only the global flood theory provides an answer to this. So, how did it get so cold so fast during the late summer? If the poles were warm, what happened? How did plants get sunlight? How did it stay cold for hundreds of years? The answer to the first question is cold hail. During the early stages of the flood, as the fountains of the great deep burst forth and shot water high above the atmosphere, some of the water laden with sediment soon froze as it radiated heat into super cold space. Above the atmosphere, temperatures are well below negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit. When the water reached this area, these frozen droplets were supercooled well below normal freezing and were transformed into muddy hail, which fell back down, blanketing vast areas in thick blankets of extremely cold hail. These warm climates were quickly transformed in hours. The dense sediments trapped in the hail caused it to sink to the bottom of any of the bodies of water on the earth. The heat from even flowing rivers were quickly absorbed by this super cold hail, and some rivers froze from the bottom up, trapping fish and crossing animals quickly frozen in place. So muddy hail can explain the extreme cold. Well, what about the woolly mammoth? We're told that these were Arctic creatures, evolved for the cold. Let's remove fact from fiction, shall we? The fiction is that they lived in the cold Arctic climate, and that's what they evolved for. What does their DNA show? That they're related to the Indian elephant. They say that they have a layer of fat for warmth, yet fat is only indicated from abundance of food supply. They don't have blubber. They have fat, like humans do, a subcutaneous layer of fat, and it goes up based on what we eat, not where we live. The mammoth so-called wool is nothing but hair, just like on an ape. Do apes live in the tropics, or do they live in the frozen tundra? The answer should be obvious. When a fluid expands, it cools greatly. Any remaining heat that was left over after the fountains of the great deep projected water into the upper atmosphere and turned it to ice would have been dumped into space, because space is the perfect heat sink. The great speeds at which the fountains flow mean that there would be little time for heat transfer with the atmosphere as it raced past. Even with some steam formation, Noah was located far away from the mid-Atlantic ridge anyway. So the hot air near any fountain would have dissipated far before reaching him, because air is a very poor conductor of heat. Let me explain. Consider that after you pass Earth's atmosphere, temperature plummets to negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit and lower. So any air that would be beside the fountains that was heated and pulled up with the flow would have a tendency to lose speed, fall away, and radiate any gained heat long before it flowed back down. Another thing to consider is that as the canopy collapsed during the flood, the atmosphere now would be expanding, causing a cooling worldwide effect, including reduction in air pressure and worldwide rain. Holding down a button on a can of hairspray, you can feel the can getting cooler. So expanding the air would reduce the temperature of the Earth and negate any effects of rising temperature. And also consider the canopy was only 9 miles up, not 60 where the top of the atmosphere is today. So the numbers that people are throwing around is all moot. And in reality, the numbers actually do show that they can be shot up 60 miles. Next, tectonic shifting caused massive mud-filled tsunamis to speed across deep ocean floors, then on the shallow ocean floors, killing everything in their path. The first megasequence wipes out mostly shallow marine habitats. Fossils show that the first 3 megasequences buried the shallow seas that were filled with marine life, as these deposits have almost no trees or land animals in them. Yet we know that all three megasequences covered similar environments across North and South America, including Africa, the three continents mapped so far. Another significant lesson was taken from the Japan tsunami of 2011, published in the Journal of Marine Geology. Though the area with the highest record tsunami waves of 20 meters was just west of Kasinama Bay, the sand that these huge waves deposited on land was still only a mere 30 centimeters thick. 20 days after the horrible tsunami hit the port, emergency surveys were conducted in the bay to make sure that ships were able to enter. The initial survey did verify that ships could safely transit in the bay, but they made an unexpected discovery. Large sand dunes had been formed by the tsunami in the seabed. The dunes were typically 6 feet high, 20 meters long, in water 15 meters deep. They refer to these underwater dunes as sand waves. Older geologists specifically argue that sand waves cannot form quickly, nor in fast currents. Therefore, they can get away with saying that sand waves found in the geologic column represents deep time. And that way, they can exclude a watery catastrophe, especially on the scale of a global flood. We see multiple surprises. Not only did sand waves form fast, with a fast current, they formed in surprisingly deep water. So every assumption that evolutionists make is completely wrong with the observable evidence. So sand wave formation can be made during a global flood. So now, all these things that these evolutionists have said debunked the global flood are now confirmation of Noah's flood. Then, by the 40th day of the flood, this is when the Absorica megasequences began hitting. The map showed that this is when things became much worse. This is when all of the land masses start to be submerged by the flood waters. Rather than the conventional model that has the seafloor spreading slowly, this runaway subduction actually happened quickly, moving at about 5 miles per hour. As the diving ocean plates subducting under the land, they push down the continental edges and then release them, creating tsunami cycles that blanket the continents. Exactly the same how tsunamis today happen, but only more intense and frequent. For example, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan was a magnitude 9.1 that occurred in 2011. This earthquake was caused by an undersea megathrust, about 45 miles east of the Japanese coast. At the center, there was a 160-foot slip between the overriding plate that was part of Japan and the underlying Pacific plate. The sea bottom rose about 23 feet when the vault unlocked, and the resulting earthquake triggered a devastating tsunami that was 133 feet above sea level and traveled inland for about 6 miles. The tsunamis occurring during the flood, however, were much different, with the ocean ridge bursting open rapidly and pushing the ocean floor under land continents on a worldwide scale. Tsunamis were happening in cycles, several every hour, and with long stretches of subduction zones active at the same time. The incoming phase of a tsunami has a much higher speed and is highly turbulent, which keeps the sediment in suspension, but it leaves behind layers of sediment as it slows down in the retreating phase. This cycle repeats several times every hour during the first 40-day inundation period of the flood. First, entombing the shallow marine life, followed by land creatures in different habitats and elevations, leaving behind what we see today in the fossil record. These types of tsunamis have even occurred in recent history, such as the tsunami caused by slipping ocean plates that hit the coast of Washington in 1700 and left behind multiple layers representing each wave of the tsunami. Recent seismic technology actually allows us to investigate whether this type of rapid subduction occurred. Sure enough, these scans reveal a ring of unexpectedly cold rock at the bottom of the mantle, beneath the subduction zones. And while the evidence shows that this rapid subduction occurred, critics still have a problem with the heat generated from this. So let's answer this now. What I believe they just don't understand is that while subduction is occurring quickly, heat from this friction is being produced. They consider this the heat problem. However, what they don't realize is that because the icy hail that brought on this ice age and global reduction of temperatures, freezing lakes, and reducing the ocean's temperature greatly, the heat generated would not be a problem whatsoever. The oceans would have absorbed this heat easily. It would be like pouring liquid lava into your pool. It would do nothing to change the temperature of that pool. The severity and elevation of this stage of the flood is why the first land creatures and plants start showing up in the fossil record, laid down by the Absorica megasequence. Entire ecosystems are buried in enormous deposits that later turn into coal, such as the extensive Appalachian coal beds. In fact, the US has over 7 trillion tons of coal reserves. But where did it come from? While we know that dead plant material being sandwiched between sediments is the cause, we know that we don't have enough vegetation on the Earth to produce that much. This proves that the pre-flood world was mostly covered by lush vegetation, and the rising flood waters and tsunamis were necessary to sweep over the lands and cover this vegetation to form the coal that we now see in this world today. Noah's flood is the only explanation. The fact that over a dozen states in the United States are filled with dinosaur fossils buried under heaps of mud also attests to the flood. In fact, geologists have found a temporarily exposed dinosaur peninsula where the dinosaurs made their last stand, now buried there along with lake and sea life, transported by the massive waves that they could not outrun. The earlier flood deposits, the first 3 megasequences, do not seem to have deposited much material. Only a few hundred yards of sediment remain, and in many places, no deposition is left at all. Deposits thousands of feet thick occur east and west of this temporarily exposed peninsula that extends from Minnesota all the way down to New Mexico. Now buried across it are pre-flood wet plants and animals, including dinosaurs, turtles, frogs, fish, and many birds. Thousands of dinosaur trackways up and down this peninsula, plus similar temporarily exposed low areas of other continents, prove that dying dinosaurs and other hardy trackmakers were fighting for their life, wading through heavy mud and sediments and water that was rising to try and kill them. Another piece of evidence, we have what was called a dinosaur stampede of fossil footprints in Australia, presumed to have been made on land. The tracks were recently reinterpreted to have been made in water, with many of the tracks being made by swimming dinosaurs. The report came out in the January 8th Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, documenting a fossil site in Western Australia, where many of the tracks are nothing more than scratch marks from what was obviously a dinosaur, being buoyed up by the water, clawing at the dirt as it swam along. This is one of many tracks found there and around the world. But all dinosaur tracks have water somewhat involved. Every single one of the dinosaur track sites were made in what best can be described as tidal flats. Jenny McGuire and Deborah Mickelson of Colorado University at Boulder presented a paper at the 2005 GSA documenting what appeared to be a trail of dinosaur tracks from a dinosaur walking and getting buoyed up by the water, more and more losing contact with the seafloor. However, the drawing that they depicted is not the reality of what happened whatsoever. This is more evolutionist storytelling and blatant lies to your face. The fossil footprints are in the middle of a series of rock layers. According to Steno's stratigraphic principles laid out in the 1600s and still adhered to today, it would be assumed that those layers were laid down horizontally. This wasn't some seashore. The principles of initial horizontality Strata, either perpendicular to the horizon or inclined to the horizon, were at one time parallel to the horizon, and nobody disagrees with this. Therefore, these tracks were not made by some dinosaur walking into the sea, but rather the dinosaur was on flat ground in what is called a tidal flat. And as the dinosaur was happily walking along, the water came in and buoyed up the dinosaur until it lost contact with the ground. This is powerful evidence that Noah's flood was true, not some dinosaur as they portray walking into the sea, especially in light of the fact that other dinosaur tracks were found in that area that were not swimming, meaning they outran the floodwaters in that area, as where this one did not. There's more evidence for this in Glen Rose, Texas. The late Cretaceous rock of Glen Rose, Texas, famous today for its so-called human footprints with dinosaur tracks, that layer is acknowledged by the evolutionary community as a tidal flat. Except that huge tidal flat covers a huge portion of North America. That layer has countless clam burrows from clams that were obviously buried alive catastrophically by mud. Dinosaurs walked in that mud. More layers were laid down during the tidal waves. Then the clams attempted to burrow their way out through those layers. The clams are found by the millions, possibly billions, all buried alive in the closed position, just a few layers above the dinosaur footprints. Now tell me, do you think that that was accomplished over millions of years, or a giant water catastrophe? The evidence is best explained, and I would dare say only explained, by Noah's flood. Then the massive Zuni megasequence hits. The Absaroka and Zuni megasequences are the most severe because the continental plates began to move more quickly from the original Pangea-like supercontinent configuration to where they are today. With oceanic rifting and plate subduction increasing dramatically and the continents traveling apart quickly, the tsunami-like waves began washing across the western North America while virtually no sedimentation is occurring in the east. When coming up over the Dinosaur Peninsula, the Zuni catastrophically buried dinosaurs in the Morrison Formation, a 13-state area encompassing over 700,000 square miles. This Jurassic unit includes at least 141 massive dinosaur bone graveyards, where dinosaurs like the Tamarasaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Allosaurus are found. The Cretaceous layers like the Hill Creek Formation are found on top of the Jurassic and holds hundreds of mass boneyards, containing several different types of dinosaurs, such as the Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, Centrosaurus, and Amontosaurus, that had been living in different ecosystems, yet all buried by the Zuni megasequence. The Zuni was so massive and fast that it engulfed entire regions with mud, burying giant creatures like this Tyrannosaurus rex under 50 feet of mud. It was entombed so quickly that it preserved blood cells, blood vessels, and bone cells. Ask yourself, how much water does it take to bury a living Tyrannosaurus rex under 50 feet of mud? The Dinosaur National Monument in Utah contains thousands of visible bones from 11 kinds of dinosaurs that were buried in a jumbled mass in the Morrison Formation, together with crocodiles, turtles, frogs, clams, and lizards. Again, ask yourself what type of event would cause different land animals with millions of clams all to be buried in the same area. When the Dinosaur Peninsula floods over completely, large herds of dinosaurs are entombed in massive fossil graveyards in the Upper Cretaceous system found in northern Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta, Canada. The dinosaurs had tried to escape by fleeing north as waters advanced from the south, explaining this massive graveyard in northern Montana that's over 1.2 miles long and contains 30 million fossil fragments, representing over 10,000 adult Maiasaur that were simultaneously buried. In this entire collection of bones, not a single baby was ever found. That's right, every single one of these 10,000 Maiasaura were between 9 and 23 feet long. This proves that the adult dinosaurs were fleeing for their lives and left their young behind. Just 170 miles northeast of this location is one of the largest dinosaur graveyards in the world, one that even secular scientists admit that was caused by a watery catastrophe. Thousands of centrosaurs are buried in 14 mega bone beds over an entire square mile, which is nearly 500 football fields. A massive herd of these creatures, thousands of them, were simultaneously buried in mud by Noah's flood. Just 45 miles west from this location is yet another massive flood deposit, and this one even has 49 different species of dinosaurs in it, buried along with turtles, crocodiles, fish, flying reptiles, birds, and small mammals. What type of disaster could bury nearly 50 different species that would never be near each other, and many other types of animals, including marine life, all together in mass graves? These mass burial sites are common in the United States. For example, at this dinosaur dig site in Wyoming, where a 1 meter thick layer of mudstone stretches for 80 acres with over 1 million bones buried in a graded, sorted bed where big bones are found at the bottom and little bones are found on top. The only way to develop a graded bed like this is by a catastrophic process that transports these bones and deposits them during a single event. Large flying creatures like pterodactyls were able to fly to escape the rising floodwaters, delaying their demise until the later stages of the flood. The fossil record shows that they are buried in many different layers all over the world. Widespread volcanism was also involved in finishing off the dinosaurs, as many of these massive graves are literally packed with volcanic ash that in many cases was mixed with water when it encapsulated the dinosaurs in their tombs. One section of the Morrison Formation, called the Brushy Basin Member, spreads across 5 states and includes over 4,000 cubic miles of volcanic materials without a single volcano in the Morrison Formation. Geologists believe this material had to be carried all the way from volcanoes on the west coast, volcanoes that were created by the magma rising from the subducting ocean crusts plunging under the land. Today, these subduction zones form the Ring of Fire, responsible for over 90% of our earthquakes. The Bible records that on the 150th day of the flood, God made a wind to pass over the earth. The water started to recede. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. Now enters the final mega sequence, the Tejas. Here, after the water peaked over the top of the highest mountains of the pre-flood world, they began to rush off the continents, eroding and reworking some of the deposits laid down in the previous mega sequences, especially carving away at the Zuni deposits. This final sequence appears to be different than the others because there was a reversal in flow direction as the waters began to sheet off of the continents. This flow reversal transported much of the fossils deposited earlier off the highest uplands, spreading them towards the edges of the continents, and the evidence points to the Tejas draining the flood waters southward, off of the US towards the Gulf of Mexico, with a sheet wash pattern all at once. This is why we find massive sand deposits in the deep water off the Gulf of Mexico. Billions of barrels of oil have been discovered there, with much of it found within a massive 1,100 foot thick bed of pure sand in over 7,000 feet of water over 200 miles offshore. In addition, plants swept off the pre-flood land formed massive coal beds, such as in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming and Montana. These Tejas layers contain the largest coal deposits in North America that currently supply over 40% of the coal in the United States. Some of these stacked coal beds are up to 200 feet thick, and areas that are over 60 miles long by 60 miles wide. The sheer volume of plant material required to form such a massive layer of coal testifies to catastrophic circumstances. The massive runoff that began with the Tejas may also explain the lack of human fossils in the rock record. any residual human remains left buried, and earlier deposits were totally destroyed by the erosive retreating flood waters, in line with God's promise to wipe man from the face of the earth. Any residual remains were ground up and spread in all directions over great distances by the Tejas, lessening the likelihood of finding any human fossil remains. Because humans were impacted earlier on by the flood's violence, erosion in the Tejas sequence would have affected the strata beneath, wiping away even traces of human remains buried in earlier layers. This is also why we hardly find any primate fossils. They're extremely rare. Matter of fact, the first one to ever be found was in 2005, and it was just a few teeth. When God stopped the fountains of the Great Deep on day 150, the new ocean surface began cooling, allowing floodwaters to lower as they sheeted off the continents into the new ocean basins. Psalms 104 describes the mountains being raised at the end of the flood, and the waters draining down the valleys and off the new land surfaces. The seafloor rifting process and the resulting mountain forming process explains why sea creatures are found on mountaintops all over the world, high above current sea levels. For the remaining 220 days of the flood, the water recedes from the earth and it dries out, allowing time for the earth to be replenished, with vegetation for the animals to eat when they eventually come off the ark. This year-long catastrophe left behind a vast number of proofs that, quite frankly, make its occurrence obvious. First, we have the staggering volume of fossil-bearing sedimentary rocks around the world, over 1 mile thick on average, including billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And the sediment that they are found in lies above sea level. What sort of water process could place so much sediment above sea level, on top of the land surfaces? Another clue is the vast horizontal extent of individual sediment layers, with little or no erosional channeling between successive layers. What sort of transport and depositional process could conceivably generate such uniform layers over such vast horizontal distances? Many of these layered beds are separated by bedding planes on the scale of inches to feet, a feature so common that if you stop to think about how it happened, it's as if the sediment is being deposited in pulses in a repeating manner, with each pulse producing a thin layer commonly found around the world. The flood tsunamis provide this perfect explanation, and it happens so quickly. There was no time between the deposition layers for surviving critters to burrow into the ground and turn them over. This is known as bioturbation. This is another major problem for long-scale evolution. You see, when living creatures burrow into the ground, they leave behind evidence that they did this, traces that we should be able to see. These geologic layers of supposed ecosystems should be filled with evidence of bioturbation, yet the evidence is not there, proving that these layers are not even hundreds of years old, let alone millions. The matter of fact, there was not enough time between each layer forming for these burrowing creatures to perform this task. You see, if each layer was an ecosystem and represents thousands or millions of years, then the evidence of bioturbation would be everywhere worldwide. But since we see no evidence of burrowing creatures between these layers, this proves two things. It proves that these layers were not laid down slowly over long periods of time, and two, it proves that it was laid down quickly during the flood of Noah when tsunamis were striking rapidly, exactly like the new physical evidence shows. When we look close at the fossil record, we see layers containing mass fossil graveyards and mass burial of catastrophic proportions. Remember, the flood started in the ocean. This is why we see the fossil record laid out like it is, with bottom-dwelling ocean life on the bottom and higher land animals on top. This is why we also find fossilized trilobite trails in layers supposedly millions of years older than the actual trilobite that made the trail. Let that sink in for a moment. So basically, all that happened were these trilobites were running up as the mud was flowing in, wave after wave from the tsunami, and they were leaving behind their prints as they died in the higher layers. not able to outrun the mud. And this is down the line. We find fossil bird prints before we find fossils of birds. We find fossil prints of dinosaurs before we find dinosaurs. Here are fossil footprints of an amphibian, but the only date they find amphibian fossils in are 15 million years later, higher up in the fossil record. Think about it. Trilobites, coral, clams, brachiopods, they would be the first to die because they can't escape. For example, when we go to the Grand Canyon and we look at fossil stromatolites, they're in the layers below the flood rocks. So we are not surprised to find that some of the domes are stacked up in a linear structure that looked like a reef. There was an ancient reef system that made these slime mats building these domes that protected a lagoon near the coast of the pre-flood continent, similar to how they do today. When the flood came, it buried that pre-flood reef and fossilized it perfectly, and it buried the creatures that were in that lagoon before the waters rose up to cover the continents. Again, we see evidence of quickly buried history. We find fossilized raindrops, ripples from water, footprints going through geological layers of time that would be impossible if these layers were laid down over millions of years. All of this evidence proves Noah's flood, not million years of evolution. You see, Charles Lyell invented the geologic column, not because of the evidence, but because he had a clear agenda to do so. In his words, it was to free the science of Moses. Even Darwin acknowledged the inconsistencies of geology. He admitted not seeing what should be expected everywhere. Stephen Jay Gould admitted the same thing in 1980. This is well over 100 years after Darwin admitted the same thing. To their dismay, David Raup agreed. He stated, "Well, we know we are now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. The record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transitions than we had in Darwin's time." Just lining things up on a table and telling a story is probably fun, especially for kids, but that's not science. The Grand Canyon is a great example for anybody to look at, because it was fractured open, perhaps by an earthquake, and we can now see the layers easily. There is virtually no erosion features between the layers when they are inspected. Also, you will notice layers have eroded flat. Flat is not how ecosystems exist. We find no fossils of death in pre-flood rock layers because no catastrophic event took place to preserve them. It's only when we get to the great unconformity that life is visible in the fossil record. We can see the flood layer when we look around the world. Here it is at the Grand Canyon. It is referred to as the Tapeats Sandstone. Here is a map where you can trace it across North America. So, what do the rock layers show? Ocean waters flooded over all the continents. Evidence for this is obvious in that there are marine fossils on the top of all mountains on Earth. There is widespread, rapidly deposited rock layers. These rock layers can be traced all the way across continents and between them. This is evidence of a worldwide global event, not random ecosystems buried over eons of time. Even museums today acknowledge that dinosaur graveyards, marine life, trees, and more were all buried quickly by a catastrophic water event. The fossil layers are 100% evidence of Noah's flood. Lake Titicaca rests at 12,500 feet above sea level today, and its fresh water have ocean aquatic life, such as seahorses alive in it today, which are only ever found in the ocean. So, this is more physical evidence, yet again, of remnants from the worldwide flood. We can test the age of a lake another way, using observable rates other than the assumption of slow continental uplift, by what we call residence time. That is, the time it takes for water to be flushed from the lake and replaced by new water. It's also called lake retention time. It is the measurement of the age of the water within the lake. For example, This figure is the result of dividing the lake volume by the flow in and out of the lake. It expresses the amount of time taken for a substance introduced into a lake flow and out of it again. In this case, salt. And for Lake Titicaca, the residence time is around 1,343 years. Not even close to millions of years that they assume and tell the public. The fact is, Lake Titicaca was raised from sea level during Noah's flood and was flooded with the ocean water during that time. The surrounding land attests to this, but more on that next. Evidence from this is that Lake Titicaca drains to the south along Altiplano tableland, spreading out over the Desaguadero and towards Lake Pupo, and from there into large salt flats, proving that Lake Titicaca was once ocean water, as these salt flats are the basin from which Lake Titicaca flows. If what I'm saying is true, that the flood waters pushed ocean water into Lake Titicaca, then its drainage of salt would be quite noticeable in the downstream of the current lake's outflow, which it is. It's all along the Altiplano to the south, where it is accumulated along the slightly sloping tableland, which drops 400 feet from Lake Titicaca. Although Altiplano and around Lake Pupo lies the Salar de Uyuni, where even more salt is found. The last 4,300 years since the flood, the lake has been draining and losing salt and exchanging it for fresh water from rain and new rivers flowing into it, leaving the lake today mostly fresh water. Salt content is nearly all gone, but yet some still remains, proving that the lake is young and not millions of years old. It's impossible. We creationists know that it was filled with seawater during the time of the flood, and pushed into its current position during the formation of the Andes because of two tests. One is of its drainage basins, which prove it was once completely saltwater. Two, it has saltwater flora and fauna in and around the lake, with millions of fossil seashells on its shores. As you should know, water always finds the lowest recesses of ground and eventually settles. This lake is in a deep pit, which the water settled in after the flood receded. It's the only explanation that fits the evidence we see. And we also have evidence of a 1,000-year-old temple beneath the waters of the Lake Titicaca. An international group of archaeologists say that there is evidence of a temple 200 meters long and 50 meters wide, along with signs of a paved road. What other event deposits ocean water and aquatic life at 12,500 feet above sea level? You see, only theory evolution has for this is that the land must have been lifted up from sea level very slowly over millions of years. But their rescuing device for this fails because this supposed continental uplift puts this occurrence before humans supposedly evolved. You see, the gradual process of plate tectonics is so slow for the ground to lift 12,500 feet from sea level, the numbers just don't add up. But wait, what about the seahorses? How can seahorses adapt so quickly to such a new environment right after the flood? The answer lies in their genes. They lack or lost many of the genes which would have caused them to die otherwise. This is why we don't see a lot more ocean life in that lake today. They were unable to adapt to the salt content changing to fresh water. Pumapunku is in Bolivia. It is a perfect example of an antediluvian structure that we can see today. At 13,000 feet elevation, it's a South American ruin that predates the Mayans. This massive structure, with its advanced stonework, was destroyed in a flood. First of all, for a flood to reach 13,000 feet elevation is pretty incredible. Next, for a flood to move these megaton blocks and bury them in over 8 feet of mud is even more astounding. As you can see, many blocks are still covered to this day. Who knows how much is hidden from sight. The flood was so powerful that it not only buried this city, but was able to break apart these stones, and some of them were moved, weighing 131 metric tons. Since no rivers flow into Lake Titicaca, which is the nearest water source to Pumapunku, the only explanation for the submerged ruins by scientists is that a major flood occurred, that reached over 2 miles above sea level. Only a global flood could do this. So this site is unique on Earth because it proves two important things. Our antediluvian ancestors were advanced in building and technology, and that a global flood occurred. The gray stones that you're seeing in this picture are from 44 miles away. The weight of the huge foundation blocks, no one even knows. The flood of Noah lines up with the evidence that we see in the world today. Scientific investigation has revealed over 1,800 oil well boreholes from 4 different continents have all been compiled and mapped. The newly emerging map tracks the thickness and extent of each rock type as they were laid down by the flood. This research reveals the same 6 megasequences of each sedimentary rock deposit across multiple continents. Each megasequence contains a huge stack of rock, often with coarse-grained sandstone on the bottom, then finer-grained deposits like shale, then topped by limestones. Each megasequence is bounded above and below by flat, eroded surfaces called unconformities. What has been discovered from both a creationist as well as from a secular understanding is that much of the continental fossil record was already in place before any of the present-day ocean crust had come into existence. For example, all of the trilobite fossils had been deposited. Plus, all of the older coal deposits had already been formed before any of the present-day ocean crust had formed. Since in creationist understanding, the presence of fossils is a completely trustworthy indicator of Noah's flood, this means that much of the flood damage had already unfolded and it generated fossil-bearing sediments on the continental surface before any of the present-day ocean floor had appeared. It further implies that all of today's ocean floor formed since the onset of the flood during roughly the latter half of the cataclysm. It also means that all of the pre-flood ocean floor, plus the ocean floor formed during the earlier portion of the flood, must have been recycled into the Earth's interior during the cataclysm. These considerations indicate in a compelling way that rapid plate tectonics must have been a major aspect of the year-long flood catastrophe. This 6 megasequence worldwide flooding process perfectly set the stage for the subsequent ice age, and the creation of a completely new seafloor of hot lava as a consequence. This caused an abnormal amount of evaporation, and thus continuous rain that was likely worldwide. The volcanic activity that created the Ring of Fire would have spewed volumes of ash and aerosols high into the atmosphere, keeping the now frozen Earth in an ice age for hundreds of years to come. And sure enough, the first megasequence's rocks show a spike in volcanic activity and massive amounts of carbon dioxide. At this point, the newly formed continents drifted with great speeds, impacting one another, forming the mountains that we see in the world today. And, for the first time ever, new megasequence maps allow us to see how Noah's flood shaped our entire planet, just like the Bible said, including reconfiguring the continents. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat on the 7th month of the 17th day of the month, and we now have evidence for this as well. We have discovered 2 amazing things. At the base of Mount Ararat, they discovered many drog stones. These gigantic stones are strewn about as though they were cut from the ship as the water receded. They are almost in a straight line pattern over 8 miles approaching the mountains. What these are for is counterbalance for a ship during huge waves. When they discovered these, they wanted to actually put this to the test and see that if a ship which weighed as much and was shaped like the Ark, would it withstand massive tidal waves. The results showed perfect results that line up exactly with what we would expect if Noah's Ark was true.
As the ship would roll and pitch, this would swing back and forth and up a little bit as the ship would pitch and roll, similar to a shock absorber in your car. And it's slowing down that momentum that would be created from that. So quite amazing that Noah's Ark would use that kind of technology.
The next amazing find is they found the cover that Noah placed over the Ark.
As far as we know, there's nothing else like this anywhere. Nobody's ever.
My goodness.
It's got crosses that are very faintly carved out. You got a big one here. You got a small one right there. One here. You ever see? It looks like a little bit like pine bark.
It sounds like metal.
How would the anchor stone be wood?
This isn't an anchor stone.
Oh, I see.
At one point it says, and Noah came out of the ark and he took the cover off, or he threw the cover off. This is a rather unique thing. It has the appearance and the texture of some kind of a bark.
That is a cross.
What?
That is a cross.
There you go.
That is incredible.
It has a very hollow sound.
Very hollow. It sounds like metal.
Noah's flood represents the single most detailed event to ever take place in the Bible. The Apostle Peter and Jesus himself referred to the flood as an actual event. Remember, when things die on land, they get eaten or degrade rather fast. The odds of life dying to make the quantity of oil that we find on Earth today is best explained by the flood. It's also safe to say that the fossil record is not valid when we find evidence of discrepancies in the record. And guess what? We do. The upside-down geologic column in Pakistan is one such place. At the foot of the Karakoram Mountains in the Salt Range Formation, scientists have discovered fossilized plants and insects. From the evolutionary perspective, these remains belong to the upper part of the geological column. However, this formation lies beneath the Cambrian rock, which is dated back to over 400 million years. Discoveries such as these support the biblical version of the Earth's history, whereby the geological column is primarily a consequence of the global flood and its aftermath. It is no surprise that there is some order to the fossil record, such as sea creatures buried beneath land creatures, and mobile creatures such as birds near the top. But, since as the Salt Range Formation testifies, the ordered charts that adorn textbooks aren't always what they find in the field. Many results today have kicked evolution hard in the dirt. They have found complete stasis in the entire Pliocene era. We also know that the Ashley phosphate beds in North Carolina have found human bones and artifacts with dinosaurs together. Also remember that they also found modern-day birds dating back in the Cambrian rock layers which supposedly evolved from dinosaurs. It's a total mess. Also consider that many of the biggest dinosaurs, such as the long-necked sauropods like Brachiosaurus, Titanosaurus, and Apatosaurus, would have eaten colossal amounts of vegetation. So why do we not find such abundance of these plants in the rocks containing these dinosaur fossils? Take for example the Morrison Formation in Montana. Even though this formation had yielded many dinosaur fossils, they're very scarce in vegetation. This phenomenon of missing vegetation doesn't just apply to dinosaurs or their rock layers. The Coconino Sandstone in the Grand Canyon has many animal trackways, but it's almost devoid of plants. These rocks tell us something profound about Earth's history. They suggest that these deposits laid down are not ecosystems buried over eons of time. Otherwise, we'd find more evidence as plants that the animals ate. Instead, the evidence fits nicely with the biblical model of early Earth's history, whereas these animals were transported and buried catastrophically during Noah's flood. Geologists have assumed and say that calm weather conditions are required for these settling processes to occur to form mudstone. Therefore, whenever they encounter mud deposits, they interpret them as forming in tranquil water environments. However, recent research published in the prestigious Journal of Science has turned this argument on its head. The researchers showed that mud deposits form from rapidly flowing water. Yet again, evolutionary theory fails when put to the test, and we have more evidence for a global flood.
Evolutionary geologists claim that the Grand Canyon is the best and most complete geologic column on Earth. In the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ontario, Canada, there displays a massive diagram of the entire Grand Canyon, layer by layer. Within it shows huge breaks in time. 480 million years are missing between the basement and the Precambrian rocks. 330 million years are missing between the Unkar-Nankawit and the Chuar Formation. Somehow came and left without a trace, while the supergroup was supposed to have sat there for some 215 million years, during which time it was tilted. It was then cut by the Tapete Sandstone. That 215 million years also left not a shred of evidence. Right here it's expected that there was 155 million years of deposition of dirt which somehow all vanished without a trace of evidence of erosion. The remains of the Surprise Canyon Formation are supposed to represent 25 million years, again alleged to have eroded away while leaving behind no evidence. The top layer of Grand Canyon is claimed to be 270 million years old, and tourists now walk around on this layer. 270 million years of geological deposits have all been washed away. If we ignore Surprise Canyon Formation, we still have a total of 1,295,000,000 years of alleged geologic time that has gone missing. This all adds up to a staggering 81% of the geologic column, which is absent without a trace in what is described as, surely, the finest record of geological history anywhere on Earth. Rock layers were originally laid down horizontal, and in the case of the Grand Canyon supergroup, they were tilted. Then they were cut off by erosion, then more layers laid down on top of that, horizontally. The rock layers do not conform, as you can see in the picture. So they suggested, evolutionists, that millions of years of time between when the supergroup was cut and when the layers were deposited. But there is no evidence of this 215 million years. You can argue all you want, but where's the evidence? If all these rock layers were laid down over millions of years, then why is there mysteriously no sediments laid down during that 215 million years on top of the cut supergroup? That's a lot of years to leave no evidence. I mean, think about it just for a second. Scientific studies have shown that sediments and even dust particles accumulate at even as low as 1 millimeter per year. At that rate, in 215 million years, that would accumulate 215,000 meters. That's over 700,000 feet of dust, debris, and ecosystem remnants that should be visible. There is no accumulation of these sediments of the alleged 215 million years of time at the unconformity layer. It's not the sediments that are missing, it's the time that's missing. Those who argue in favor of deep time are arguing from an absence of evidence. This is the same problem which occurred with the moon. When they first went to the moon, they had expected to land in multiple feet of dust accumulation because they expected the moon to be very old according to their deep time belief. When they landed, there were only a few inches of dust, proving exactly the same thing we're looking at with the fossil record. Everything is young. The Earth, the moon, and so is the Grand Canyon.
The space program has been of great interest, but I want to tell you two things they discovered. Part of them had to do with that radioisotopic heater because it powered a number of the instruments, but particularly the first instruments placed on the moon. Neil Armstrong took the first step. Buzz Aldrin placed the first instrument on the moon. That was a seismograph or a seismometer, depending on how you approach it. It was to measure the moonquakes, and it was powered by Richard Grove's radioisotopic heater. If you Google moon instruments, seismograph, you'll see a sketch, a photo, or a sketch of the seismograph. If it's a sketch, if it's a diagram, you will see an arrow pointing to a little round cylinder, and it'll say isotopic heater. And that's what he designed and placed there. Anyhow, that first instrument not only was a seismograph, but it had panels that monitored the rate of cosmic dust settling on the moon. Bill Overn, aerospace engineer, was assigned the task of building those big dishes, those pods on the bottom of the lunar lander legs. You see, the evolutionary community knew the moon was 4.4 billion years old and the Earth was 4.6 billion years old. Everybody knows the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and everybody knows the moon is 4.4 billion years old, right? So anyhow, they wanted to understand, wanted to monitor the rate. So they estimated the rate at which cosmic dust was coming in from outer space and settling on the moon, given its gravitational attraction, giving a larger gravitational attraction next door. You still with me? The Earth would pull in more. Factoring all of that in, the rate of moon dust settling. So everybody knew the moon was 4.4 billion years old. So given estimating the rate at which cosmic dust was settling in, that would mean that these astronauts settling on the moon, landing on the moon, would be landing into a sea of unconsolidated cosmic dust. That's the reason for those huge pods, dishes, concave dishes. There were 4 of them. Bill Overn, who was a personal friend of mine, he's now home in glory. Bill Overn, helped design those. He was commissioned to head the committee. And he said, you're not going to need them because the moon's not that old. They said, certainly, everybody knows the moon is how old? 4.4 billion. So sure, we're going to design them. So he's okay. So he designed them. Well, as you know, when they landed on the Sea of Tranquility, they were going to land in a crevasse, a huge ditch with huge boulders. So Neil Armstrong, who was an incredible pilot, took manual control. They had 19 seconds of fuel left. Did you know that? There were 19 seconds from absolute disaster. Or to land in there, in that crater, would have been disaster. With the huge boulders, what's going to happen? They only had one thruster to get out. Did you know that? The moon lander only had one thruster engine to get out. So he took manual control, moved it over, set it down, and he said, Houston, the Eagle has landed. And they were pleased. We all were pleased. But they saw very little dust. So later, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And he stepped down, and a few moments later, he said it's only about 1/8 of an inch thick. How correct was he? Because of the instrument to power our other instruments on the moon, collection of solar panels. Recently, Dr. Brian O'Brien, who was with Rice at that time, Rice University in Houston, went back to Australia. He's a physicist at Western Australia University. Found his backup tapes, and they were able now to calculate, just recently, to calculate the rate at which cosmic dust settles on the moon. And it turns out to be much more rapid than they thought. Their calculations show it settles at the following: 1 millimeter per millennium, per 1,000 years. Now, you multiply 1 millennium, which is 1,000 years, back to the time of the flood when this whole thing got disrupted. In case you want to take notes, 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18 describe the activity on earth that actually sent out waves and sound and energy into the heavens at the time of the flood, when the flood was initiated. The only safe place on earth was inside a boat. 4,400 years. Okay, so you multiply the time and the accretion of the dust, which is 0.04 inches. He said it was 1/8 of an inch. You multiply roughly 4,500 years ago.
Too close.
He was wrong. It's not 1/8, it's 1/5 of an inch. So he was spot on. The moon is young. So you won't find NASA teaching that. But it wasn't until recently that they found the backup tapes and were able to actually calibrate with other instruments. And here we have, the moon is very young.
More problems. If you look at flow number 1 in the chart, called the Cordinus basalt, it was dated using rubidium strontium isochron at 1.07 billion years old. Well, the other lava flow on top of it, flow number 2 in the chart, they found Native American pottery from a tribe that lived in that region between 1,000 and 1,200 years ago. So they knew how old the lava was. But using the same dating method, the dates returned at 1.34 billion years old on lava that we know was only around 1,000 years old. Contrary to what mainstream science wants you to think and believe, the dating methods give vastly different answers on the exact same rocks tested. The Grand Canyon itself is far more of a depiction of Noah's flood than it is uniformitarianism millions of years. The Empire Mountain Thrust Fault, just south of Tucson, Arizona, has Permian rocks on top of Cretaceous. What's especially interesting here is that the Cretaceous limestone is actually marble. It has undergone heating and pressure. It has changed its state because of this, and it's called metamorphosis.
The Permian rocks have not experienced this heat and pressure, so this would actually indicate that the Cretaceous rocks are older than the Permian rocks. It further indicates that this out-of-order sequence is genuine. There is no overthrust here. As Burdick and Slusher documented back in 1969, no slick and slides, the Permian rocks had never been heated, and the rocks are locked together in what Burdick describes as a gear mesh fit. The rocks on the bottom were gouged out and then filled in with upper rocks. Obviously, the rocks did not slide relative to each other. So the rescuing device was that the rocks slid very slowly, and that is why the rocks didn't heat up or melt. And people mention the San Andreas Fault in California as an example of this. Well, the San Andreas Fault is not an overthrust. It is rocks that are sliding beside each other. So again, the gear mesh interlocking of the layers show that there was no movement between the layers. They're locked together. And this is secular scientists that agree to this. This isn't some creationist propaganda. These are not overthrust. They again are genuine sequences of reversals of the evolutionary timescale. Regardless, there are far more problems with the geologic column around the world. What I have presented to you are examples after examples and evidence after evidence that there are layers that are out of sequence and order, evolutionary speaking, that there are hundreds of these in North America alone. And even if there was just one of these, it would invalidate the geologic column and ultimately evolutionary theory. And because there are far more than just one, it also invalidates the geologic history of Earth, because these are supposed to be sequences of time. And if these are not sequences of time, they cannot use these for evidence of time. So in conclusion, these are not thrust faults. They are invalidations of the fictitious geologic column and deep time. I am astonished by the secular camp and the atheist who can see this evidence for themselves and deny it, and then get mad at us for showing them that they were lied to, and then they take the liar's side, defending them. It is complete insanity. But let's move on, I digress. Here's the most recent refinement. I love this, by the way. The Geological Society of America has claimed to be able to date parts of the scale with an accuracy of 0.05% accuracy. With such horrible precision, you shouldn't even question why they get dates wrong so often. Everything they feed the public is for the story they want to wield. They have no evidence. They make it up as they go along. There were at least 6 different skeletons found on the island of Guadeloupe in the 1800s. These skeletons were of completely modern human beings found in rocks dated 25 million years old, according to evolution. Yet according to evolutionary theory, humans haven't been around for at least 100 to 200,000 years. So now you probably know why these skeletons are not on display. One of them was on display at the British Museum of Natural History for over 50 years. That was until evolutionary theory took hold. In total, they excavated over 30,000 different bones and remains from that rock layer, which is dated at around 25 million years old. And like all evidence that comes out against evolutionary theory, it's buried in the basement of a museum to never be seen or heard from again. Are we to believe that the high Arctic had an animal diversity as diverse as the Serengeti, yet was covered in ice and snow and going through an ice age? This is completely ridiculous. In 1924, the Doheny Scientific Expedition ventured into the Havasu Canyon region of the Grand Canyon. The expedition report, penned by Samuel Hubbard, is a short but fascinating read. Now, this short expedition brought multiple enigmas to the attention of the scientific community. One discovery of fossil footprints was only briefly mentioned in the report, saying that Mr. Gilmore was at a loss to explain these carboniferous footprints. That Mr. Gilmore
was Charles W. Gilmore, who gave more detail in the Smithsonian Miscellaneous Collections. Mr. Gilmore showed the footprints which bore a clear resemblance of horse footprints to the local Native Americans to see what they would say about them. The local Native Indians considered them to be the tracks of a band of wild horses. Now I want you to remember, Indians were natural trackers, and they could well identify any animal by its footprints, as their hunt depended on it. I would think they know what a horse footprint looked like, especially considering the fact that they owned and rode horses daily at this point. But the problem for evolutionism was that these footprints were out of place. They were in Permian rocks. The rocks were far too old, according to evolutionary theory. After all, many people still believe in the evolution of the horse. Although the sequence has been proven wrong years ago, it still appears in textbooks today. So I'm sure many listening still believe in this lie. But regardless, if you actually look at the charts, the first supposed ancestor of the horse supposedly had arisen 50 million years ago. But now these fossil footprints in the Grand Canyon, identical to those of modern-day horses, were in rocks that had been dated by evolutionists pushing 300 million years. Not only does this totally debunk horse evolution, but it puts modern horse way down at the bottom of the geologic timescale. Mr. Gilmore did the only thing he could have done, which was attempt to explain away the footprints as not even fossil footprints, a desperate rescue device. He tried to say that they were just stains in the rock. But decades later, the famous E.D. McKee visited the footprints and called them footprints. He said it's ridiculous to not call them footprints, but he labeled them as an unidentified vertebrate animal, or just an animal with 4 legs. Native Americans specifically told them these are horse tracks and they belong to that animal. The answer was so glaringly obvious, but you see, evolutionary theory does not permit the glaringly obvious conclusion. Evolutionary theory is not science. It is anti-science, ruling out possibilities and discoveries before they are even made, and anything that is contradictory to it. These horse fossil footprints rule out the anti-science theology, which is evolutionism. So in closing, horses supposedly evolved around 50 to 60 million years ago, yet we find horse tracks deeper than we do dinosaur tracks in the geologic column in the Grand Canyon. But it gets better. The Doheny expedition also documented the fascinating petroglyph of what they even labeled as a dinosaur. Hubbard commented that the photograph of the dinosaur petroglyph had been shown to a scientist of report, who then remarked, "It is not a dinosaur. It is impossible because we know that dinosaurs were extinct 12 million years before man appeared on the earth." Gotta love how they know it's a fact, even though the very date that they quote in this is so far off by any evolutionist standard today. Now, they tell people they know that dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. Then when that date changes, the new one will be a fact. How about some biological evidence? We have this as well. Let's take a look at the L, M, and M haplogroups. These directly correlate with Noah's 3 sons that were on the ark. You see, if evolution were true, we would have a plethora of different haplogroups in the diversity of humans today, not just 3. This is evident when we look back in time at ancient man. We see tons of different haplogroups, but yet after the flood bottleneck, we only find 3. Why is that? It's obvious. All humans today derive from the 3 sons of Noah, and genetics proves it today. But it goes much further than just this. There's evidence everywhere. If Noah's Ark is true, and the Ark landed on the mountains of Ararat, and the people from it spread, Then Ham's line went to Africa, which has always had the fastest birth rates. Half the women give birth before the age of 18, even today. And because of this, we can make predictions based on their mitochondrial DNA. We're going to find out that young Earth creationism is proven right yet again. Now, how about some of the typical complaints from the skeptic? Such as, what did Noah feed the animals on the ark? Where did they all go to the bathroom? Obviously, this would be a huge problem, would it not? Well, not really. The answer to this is quite simple, especially when we look at cold regions of the world like Sweden, where 7 months out of the year, it's so cold that the animals move under people's homes just to stay warm. To combat this, people are trying to keep them out, but it's nearly impossible, so people eventually just start spreading out a thin layer of wood shavings and peat moss with straw. It's called deep litter. It works by absorbing waste for up to 2 years, requiring no cleanup whatsoever, and it also absorbs smell. One of the reasons why it works so good is by not removing the waste, good microbes come and make their homes in the litter, and these microbes actually eat and break down the feces and consume unhealthy bacteria, leaving good bacteria behind. As for the animals and eating, well, remember, these are small animals. They're very young, and they have to be, because how else could they repopulate the earth if they're old? They might not even want to reproduce. So having very young, small animals on a ship would require not very much food. Also consider, nearly all animals can fall into a hibernation state to survive extreme colds or famines. A lot of things that you've seen in this video are genuine sequences of reversals of the evolutionary timescale. They invalidate it. And these reversals of alleged time demonstrate that there is no deep time. If there is no deep time, then there is no evolution. So if the geological record actually shows clearly the flood of Noah, and if evolution is wrong about that, and the Bible is right about that, then what else is the Bible right about? You see, Jesus talked about the worldwide flood as a fact. And in fact, he cited the flood as a judgment from God, and warned that in the last days it would be the same way, before the coming. And in the last days there would be a final warning, exactly the same as it was with Noah. For 120 years, Noah warned the people of earth of the judgment to come, and pointed to the ark, which was free salvation from the judgment to come. And Jesus warned us about the judgment to come. And Jesus is that salvation, and that kingdom is coming in the clouds, and every eye shall see it, and it will be too late, just as it was in the days of Noah, as the ark was sealed.
In 2014, a group of master's students at Leicester University decided to settle the question. They used the biblical measurements to calculate the size of the ark. Then they used the density of the water to figure buoyancy, and from there determine how much weight the ship could endure before sinking. Their conclusion? Noah could have put 70,000 animals on board and the ship would have floated.
And what do you know? It floats!